Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, statutory order, consideration of a motion for confirmation of the declaration of emergency.
Mr. Mendicino, seconded by Mr. Trudeau, moves that pursuant to Section 58 of the Emergency Act, this House confirms the declaration of a public order emergency proclaimed on February 14th, 2022. Debate. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be sharing my time with the Minister of Public Safety. On Monday, as we entered the third week of illegal blockades and occupations, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. We did it to protect families and small businesses, to protect jobs and the economy. We did it because the situation could not be dealt with under any other law in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we did it because that's what responsible leadership requires us to do. For the good of all Canadians, the illegal blockades and occupations have to stop, and the borders have to remain open. We've made progress since Monday. On Tuesday, the border was reopened in southern Alberta after the Coutts blockade was dismantled. The RCMP arrested a small group of people within the larger blockade and seized firearms, ammunition, and body armor. It is believed that this group was willing to use force against police officers. On Wednesday, the blockade in Emerson, Manitoba, had been cleared without arrests or charges. Traffic and trade at this border crossing have now resumed. In Windsor, Mayor Dilkens said law enforcement was able to successfully intercept a new convoy suspected of heading to the Ambassador Bridge. And here in Ottawa, law enforcement now has more tools and resources in order to give the people of this city their jobs, neighbourhoods, and freedoms back. À Windsor.
In Windsor, Coutts, and Emerson, illegal blockades have been cleared, and traffic and trade at the border crossings have now resumed or are in the process of doing so. And I would like to thank the police forces for their work, including the RCMP members on the ground. For the good of the economy, families, and workers, it is high time that these illegal and dangerous activities stop, including here in Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, invoking the Emergencies Act is not something that we do lightly. It's not the first option, or even the second or the third. It is a last resort. When I consulted the premiers of the provinces and territories on Monday, I was very clear. By blocking supply chains, these illegal blockades are doing considerable harm to our economy and to all Canadians.
It's consistent with the requirements of the Emergencies Act that the views of the premiers of all provinces and territories be carefully considered, and that is what we did. And the consultation and collaboration with the premiers will continue until the situation is resolved. Like I said on Monday, the scope of the Emergencies Act is time-limited and targeted, as well as reasonable and proportionate. It strengthens and supports law enforcement agencies so they have more tools to restore order and protect critical infrastructure. These illegal blockades are being heavily supported by individuals in the United States and from elsewhere around the world. We see that roughly half of the funding that is flowing to the barricaders here is coming from the United States. The goal of all measures, including financial measures in the Emergencies Act, is to deal with the current threat only and to get the situation fully under control. Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure Canadians that when the Emergencies Act is invoked, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to protect their individual rights. We're not using the Emergencies Act to call in the military. We're not limiting people's freedom of expression. We're not limiting freedom of peaceful assembly. We're not preventing people from exercising their right to protest legally. We are, in fact, reinforcing the principles, values, and institutions that keep all Canadians free. The blockades and occupations are illegal. They're a threat to our economy and relationship with trading partners. They're a threat to supply chains and the availability of essential goods like food and medicine. And they're a threat to public safety.
The Emergencies Act will be time-limited and targeted to address threats from illegal occupations and blockades only. The measures are reasonable and proportional. And I want to make it clear for Canadians, Mr. Speaker, when the Emergencies Act is invoked, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to protect individual rights. We do not use the Emergencies Act to deploy the military. We do not suspend fundamental rights. We don't restrict freedom of expression or the right to peaceful protest. What we want is to keep Canadians safe, protect workers' jobs, and restore confidence in our institutions.
We understand that everyone is tired of this pandemic. We understand that Canadians are frustrated with COVID. Some protesters came to Ottawa to express their frustration and fatigue with public health measures, and that's their right. Like I said, it's a right that we'll defend in this free and democratic country. But illegal blockades and occupations are not peaceful protests. They have to stop.
We are all looking forward to the end of the pandemic. Public health measures are constantly being reevaluated, and we will continue to modify them based on science and the situation, and we will continue to encourage vaccination.
This week, based on advice from public health experts, Health Minister Duclos announced that we'll soon start easing border measures for travellers. Our government, the Health Minister...
If I can interrupt the Prime Minister for a second, we need to make sure we're not using proper names in here, so we want to stick to the riding names. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This week, based on advice from public health experts, the Health Minister announced that we'll soon start easing border measures for travellers. Our government will continue to follow the best scientific advice to keep Canadians safe and support healthcare workers. People are making sacrifices, and have been for 2 years. It's never time to hurt our communities or our fellow Canadians with illegal blockades, but especially not now that we're reopening and beginning to get back to the things we love. That's why, Mr. Speaker, it is so important for us to be having this debate today and in the days to come, and for Parliament to play its role in this process. Today, I ask all members of this House to take action against illegal blockades that are harmful to Canadians. I ask all members of this House to stand up for families and workers, to stand up for jobs and our economy, and to stand up for the freedom of Canadians and for public safety. Merci, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments.
And we'll try our best to get all parties represented during this time. The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Minister for Emergency Preparedness have repeatedly stated that there is evidence of foreign extremist financing behind this convoy. Last week at Public Safety Committee, Deputy Director of Intelligence for FinTrack, Barry McKillop, stated that there is no evidence that this funding in Ottawa is tied to ideologically motivated extremism. Under further questioning, he stated that there has been no spike in suspicious transactions. Under what basis is this government freezing the bank accounts of Canadians in violation of Section 8 of the Charter against unreasonable search and seizure?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think it is going to be extremely important that in this House over the coming days there will be important and robust debate on many such issues. But I can highlight once again, Mr. Speaker, that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to apply. The Emergencies Act is subject to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the measures that we've brought forward are proportional, measured, and responsible, and designed to get Canadians their lives back, their communities back, and restore their freedoms.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that roughly everyone agrees about the intent, namely to end the siege in Ottawa, which is almost the only hostile protest that is still active here. If the intent is fine, but while it is, the means to achieve the end is not. If Quebec had ended protests, well, they did without the Emergencies Act. They opened the border without using the Act, and arms were seized without the Emergency Measures Act. And the Ambassador's Bridge was reopened without the Emergencies Act. And there are other situations that were solved without this Act. How come the Prime Minister say that there's no other means to intervene? And how come he cannot exclude the other provinces, such as Quebec, who do not want to be subject to the use of the Emergencies Act? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Police forces in jurisdictions across the country now have more tools at their disposal to tackle these blockades and illegal occupations when and if they are needed. And we will continue to make sure that measures are proportional and reasonable and limited in time. But it is important to give more tools to our police officers who need them. We understand that in many parts of the country, they were able to properly control the situation, but the Emergencies Act applies across the country, will only be used, though, when it is necessary.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For weeks, this occupation was allowed to continue. People lost their wages. Citizens were harassed. The potential for violence grew. And the federal government, instead of acting, argued over jurisdiction. So what responsibility does the Prime Minister take for the inaction that made the Emergencies Act necessary?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to reiterate that from day one of these barricades and blockages and occupations, the federal government has been supplying resources and working closely with local police of jurisdictions to ensure that they had the tools that they needed. Obviously, this situation has evolved, this situation has escalated, but every step of the way, the federal government has been there to support the law enforcement of jurisdiction. Here in Ottawa, that means the Ottawa Police Services and the OPP, and we will continue to be there with the RCMP as necessary.
Time for about a 15-second question and answer. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you very much, Speaker. As you very much aware that my riding includes Parliament Hill, which has been under siege for over 3 weeks now, Speaker. My community has been held hostage, and I can assure you that these protests have not been peaceful or lawful. My question to the Prime Minister is, how is this Emergencies Act is going to help my constituents in Ottawa Centre?
The Honourable Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians continue to have the right to free expression, the right to protest peacefully, but occupying the downtown of our major cities, protesting and blocking border crossings is unacceptable. That is why we have given more tools in a proportional way to police officers.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate, the Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Prime Minister for commencing this important debate on the invocation of the Emergencies Act for the first time. And I want to begin with a number of expressions of gratitude, both to my colleagues on this side of this House. I'd also like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the opposition for the informed debate which we're about to have. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Canadians because I know that this has been a very difficult time, a period of great frustration and anxiety and uncertainty, and it is not lost on me, and I hope not on all members of the Chamber, that the confluence of events of the pandemic and now these illegal blockades does create for an emotionally charged atmosphere, and sometimes we let that get the better of us here in this Chamber, but my sincere hope is that we'll be able to have a principled debate about why it is that the government has chosen to invoke the Emergencies Act, the paramount reason being the health and safety of all Canadians. Now, you've heard the Prime Minister set out what the test for the invocation of the Emergencies Act is, and I know that my colleague, the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General and other members will elaborate on that, but I want to focus my comments on what I believe are the perceived and real risks to public safety that we have seen over the last number of weeks, which emanated from the so-called Freedom Convoy. Now, this convoy has been taking to the streets right across the country and at other critical infrastructure, including our borders, our national symbols, our communities, our neighborhoods, and it has had a profound impact. And I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, and to members of this chamber, a very negative and detrimental impact to public safety. I want to touch on a number of the ports of entry which have been interrupted significantly as a result of the participation of those in the illegal blockades, including at Coutts in Alberta, Emerson in Manitoba, Surrey, British Columbia, Windsor, Ontario, Sarnia, Ontario, Fort Erie, Ontario, as well as here in Ottawa. I hope that all members would recognize that the kind of conduct that we have seen at our borders puts into serious question, the integrity and the security of this country. The impact at Coutts, for example, has cost the economy approximately $48 million per day. In Emerson, $73 million a day. And in Windsor, where we conduct nearly or roughly a quarter of all of our daily trade with our most important trading partner in the United States, roughly $390 million. Now, those are just numeric figures, but I think about the translation of those dollar figures into the impact on Canadians' jobs, on families, on those who are just trying to get by right now. And whatever the motivation of some individuals who have commingled with those organizers and agitators of this illegal blockade, whatever their concerns are with regards to the government's strategy to get out of the pandemic, which of course is to get vaccinated, it has become something much, much more concerning. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that we have made some progress at these ports of entry, and that is in large part thanks to the very important work that has been undertaken by the members of our law enforcement. Je vous remercie.
I would like to thank the RCMP for their efforts and energy. All police forces, in fact, they're doing good work on the ground. There's a lot of progress being made. Most of our borders are now open, and that is good for our economy and for trade. And it's also good for Canadians. But this progress, it's not a given.
That we continue to guarantee the progress that we have made. I want to speak for a moment about the situation here in Ottawa, and I know that many of my colleagues in the NCR caucus have spoken very articulately and very passionately about the damage that has been caused in our communities and our neighborhoods. Mr. Speaker, I've heard some members on the opposition side try to somehow cast a minimization, some kind of effort to generalize what is going on outside of this chamber as being legitimate. It is not, Mr. Speaker. It's illegal, and it causes great harm. We've seen people intimidated, harassed, been threatened. We've seen apartment buildings that have been chained up. We've seen fires set in the corridors. Residents are terrorized, and it is absolutely gut-wrenching to see the sense of abandonment and helplessness that they have felt now for weeks. And I want to assure them that since day one, that the federal government has done everything that it could to provide additional resources. The RCMP has sent three sets of reinforcements to the Ottawa Police Service, and will continue to do whatever we can to help. But it is also important, I think, for members of this chamber to recognize that we here, we write the laws, we set the policies, but we trust our police, our law enforcement, to enforce them. And that is why it is so important that we use every tool in our box, especially now, where we find ourselves in a predicament, in a dilemma, in a situation that has perhaps never been seen before. Now, I ask myself, Mr. Speaker, and I hope others are reflecting as well, what's this all about? And trying to step back and looking at what it is that's occurring. And I'm concerned. I've heard some people say, and still say, that this is a protest about vaccines. It's not. Or that it's a protest about mandates. It is not. I've heard some people say still that this is a protest about freedom. Mr. Speaker, what is going on outside in the streets of Canada at our borders is most certainly not about freedom.
Absolutely not.
It is not about freedom. It is about a very small, organized, and targeted group of individuals who are trying to strip away the very freedoms that we here have sworn to uphold.
Exactly.
That the generations of those who preceded us have sworn to uphold, Mr. Speaker. Now, I've seen many striking similarities in the way that these blockades have manifested across the country, the tactics that they are using, the timing in which they are occurring, the targets, whether they are national symbols, like the Parliament here, or provincial legislatures, like the War Monument outside, where we hear members speak passionately about their forebears who went and made the sacrifices for the freedoms that we now enjoy. The individuals outside are tearing down the barriers to attack those monuments. Now, what does that say? Those are going. I know members are heckling, but I'm encouraging them to reflect. And also the rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. And yes, the rhetoric. And yes, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the efforts of my colleagues to try to shout me down, I'm speaking here on behalf of constituents and Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And yes, there is an ideologically motivated operation that we see in the rhetoric here that is meant to incite. And that is indeed one of the reasons why, Mr. Speaker, that we have chosen, that we've had to invoke the Emergencies Act. Now, I want to assure members that these are very targeted measures, that they are time limited, that they are protected and bound by the Charter. And for those who want to ask questions as to how those powers are going to be enforced, part of the debate is going to ensure that there are the sufficient guardrails and safeguards in place. There will be transparency on how those measures are implemented. There will also be an inquiry to be sure, so that we can learn from these lessons and make sure that this is an instrument that has been used responsibly and in a manner that is consistent with the Charter to uphold the health and safety of all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Now, at the end of the day, we're all here, I would hope, to do one thing, and that is to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We find ourselves at a crossroads with the pandemic, but we've made progress. We've made progress with the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and we are making progress in restoring public order. But it is absolutely imperative that we have these debates in a principled, in a reasonable manner that is respectful of our constituents, respectful of Canadians, and that is certainly something that I hope that we will see over the next number of days.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister today and in a news conference yesterday has repeatedly stated that there is an ideologically motivated violent extremist. There is a small group of extremists who are willing to use violence. He says that there are ties between extremists that were apprehended in Coutts and extremists here in Ottawa. But when asked repeatedly by the media to back up that assertion with evidence, the minister failed to provide any evidence. We are talking about invoking a once in 34-year Emergencies Act. Parliamentarians deserve real evidence, not conjecture, from this minister before we can ever contemplate suspending the rights of Canadians. And what basis does this minister make to claim that there are violent extremists in Ottawa?
The Honourable Minister.
I want to thank my colleague for the question, and I'm afraid he operates from the false premise that the Emergencies Act is any kind of suspension of charter rights. It's not. As I've said throughout the course of the debate, and as the Act itself says, that all of the powers that need to be exercised in the Emergencies Act must be done in accordance with the Charter. Mr. Speaker, that means ensuring that Section 8 is respected. That means which protects people from the right of It guarantees the right to be protected from any unreasonable search and seizure, and same for Section 7 as well. Thank you.
Commentaire, questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Matisse, Matin, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the beginning of his speech, the minister said that he was proud for tabling this motion, proud of being the first Minister of Public Safety to invoke the Emergencies Act since its application. How can he be proud of applying a law that will limit fundamental rights of Quebecers and Canadians? Listening to the Prime Minister, he said it was the measure of last resort. Unfortunately, I don't think he used all the tools in the toolbox before getting to this point. I'd like to know what other actions could have been taken before they invoked the Emergencies Act. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As usual, I want to thank my colleague for her question. The Emergencies Act is a last resort. It is not the first option, it's not our preference, and that is why we added many resources since the beginning to help police forces restore order. Now we are at a very difficult time with many challenges, and that is why we introduced this measure. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while I was listening to the Honourable Member's speech, he spoke of the people that are being impacted by the blockades. He spoke about the harassment and the assaults, and I know I've spoken to a lot of workers in this downtown about that as well. It's truly heartbreaking. I think of the workers and the businesses that have been impacted negatively. I think about the people at the Rideau Centre. I think about people within my own region in southwestern Ontario and those businesses who have been impacted. But what is this government's plan to help those workers and those businesses after this debate is done? After we've seen that the protesters have gone home, after everything, we've been asking for this government to come up with a plan. So what's the plan for those people after?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank my colleague for her question, and I share her concerns about public safety, and certainly the impact of these illegal blockades across the country has not only undermined public safety, but it has impacted families' abilities and individuals' abilities to provide for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure my colleague that we will work with her and with all members so that once we clean up these illegal blockades and we have public safety restored on the streets here in Ottawa, that the Government of Canada will continue to be there to support Canadians as we have been throughout the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat. Continuing debate. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will be splitting my time with the member for Mégantic-Lérable today. Speaker, this week, for the first time since its passage, the Emergencies Act has been invoked by the Prime Minister. This is historic, and it is extremely disappointing. The Prime Minister has invoked the Act, he says, to deal with the protests that have gathered here in downtown Ottawa and blockades that were happening at the Coutts border in Alberta, the Emerson border in Manitoba, the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, and the border at Surrey, all of which, by the way, are now open. There are no more blockades at any borders. What's left are the trucks parked outside here in Ottawa that need to move or be moved. However, throughout the last 3 weeks, the Prime Minister has failed to take meaningful action to de-escalate the protests here or use any tools that he may have available. Instead, he has jumped straight to the most extreme measure. And as he has invoked the Act, he has failed to meet the high threshold set out by the Emergencies Act to justify it. That being, and I quote, when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of the country. Conservatives do not believe the government has shown that threshold has been met, and thus we will be voting against it. Keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, this Act is already invoked and is the new law of the land. Our debate and the vote on Monday can only stop it if the NDP vote with Conservatives and the Bloc to stop it. Supporting the use of the Emergencies Act is one of the most serious decisions a parliamentarian can make. I want to remind especially the NDP of this, who are supporting the Liberals in this sledgehammer approach. History will not be kind to the leader of the NDP or his members on this particular question. The Emergencies Act predecessor, the War Measures Act, was only used 3 times: World War I, World War II, and the FLQ crisis. Colleagues, we should keep these precedents in mind. The weight of those events should caution us against making this decision lightly. These protests have caused disruptions for many Canadians, especially local businesses and residents of Ottawa. As I have said, Conservatives are the party of law and order. We believe the trucks should move or be moved. But, Mr. Speaker, we want to lower the temperature across the country. The Prime Minister clearly wants to raise it. Let's be very clear how this all started. The Prime Minister decided to impose a vaccine mandate on truckers with no scientific evidence that it was the right thing to do. Many Canadians opposed it, but he went ahead anyway. Truckers and millions of Canadians felt they had no recourse with this Prime Minister, and who can blame them? After all, this was the Prime Minister who called them racist and misogynist. He said their views were unacceptable, that they were on the fringe. And when truckers and their supporters arrived in Ottawa, what did the Prime Minister do first? He hid for a week, and then he continued his insults, calling them and anyone who supported them or even talked with them things like Nazi supporters. We saw that name-calling and unfair and mean-spirited characterization happen just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, by the Prime Minister of Canada in this House. That is all he has done to rectify the problem: call names and insult. Mr. Speaker, many of the people that are protesting, many of the people who are upset are our neighbours. They are our constituents. They are Canadians, and they want to be heard and given even just a little respect by their Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister has decided that because he disagrees with them, doesn't like their opinions, he won't hear them. At every turn, the Prime Minister has stigmatized, wedged, divided, and traumatized Canadians. And now, without even a single meeting with a trucker, without talking through one of their concerns, without apologizing for his insults and listening to what people have to say, without using any other tool at his disposal, he has used this overreach, this Emergencies Act, and it's wrong. The Prime Minister's leadership in this situation has frankly been abysmal. He said this week, and I quote, "Invoking the Emergencies Act is never the first thing a government should do, or even the second. The Act has to be used sparingly and as a last resort." But his actions have shown the opposite approach. The so-called measure of last resort has come before taking any action to address the frustrations at the root of the protest. How did the Prime Minister go directly from ignoring the truckers to turning this to the Emergencies Act? Why is the government jumped straight to this without doing anything to lower the temperature first? Conservatives put forward a reasonable approach that could help bring the temperature down and address the concerns. We asked the government to commit publicly to a specific plan and timeline to roll back federal mandates and restrictions. But the Liberals and NDP refused to support our plan, and instead the Prime Minister reached for more power. This comes as provincial governments are announcing plans to end COVID-19 restrictions. The Prime Minister is an exception to this trend, and he refuses to come forward with a plan. Even the provinces are unhappy with the Prime Minister for doing this. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, they're all opposed to the use of the Emergencies Act. This is not a good look for the Prime Minister. We all want the trucks here in Ottawa to move. We want a peaceful and quick end to the trucks blocking the streets in Ottawa. Our message to those protesting is still this: Conservatives have heard you. We will keep standing up for you. But it's time to move the trucks. At the same time, no government should resort to the kind of extreme measures that we're seeing. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has a track record of serious disregard for the law, and that raises a lot of red flags. This is the Prime Minister who interfered with an ongoing criminal trial in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. This is a Prime Minister who took the Speaker to court instead of fulfilling his legal obligation to provide documents to this Parliament. On 2 separate occasions, this is the Prime Minister who has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner. This Prime Minister admitted his basic admiration for basic dictatorships. Red flag after red flag after red flag. He may not like it, Mr. Speaker, but in Canada, civil liberties must be defended at every turn. Section 2 guarantees our freedom of association and assembly. Section 7 guarantees our right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Section 8 guarantees our protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Canadians can't be expected to simply take this Prime Minister at his word. His plans are not consistent with fundamental freedoms. The government should not have the power to close the bank accounts of Canadians on a whim. The Prime Minister is doing this to save his own political skin, but Mr. Speaker, this is not a game. It comes at the cost to Canadians' rights and freedoms. Speaker, Parliament should not allow the Prime Minister to avoid responsibility in this way. I urge all members of this House, proceed with extreme caution. Now is the time to stand up for your constituents, to show real leadership, to help heal our divisions, to listen to those we disagree with, to not shut them down, to not tell them that they are irrelevant, to not speak insults to them. That is the job of each one of us as members of Parliament. No matter who we represent, we have to represent them with integrity, with hope, with honour. And what the Prime Minister is doing, Mr. Speaker, he has for the last 2 years disregarded these Canadians, called them names and insulted them. It is time to show leadership for every one of us and say no to this Emergencies Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now I will speak on behalf of my constituents, which all of you are sworn to do. I just ask the members opposite, if this kind of occupation was happening in their neighborhoods, in their ridings, for 4 weeks in a row, for 4 weeks in a row, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I just want to say, the longer I get to stand here, the less option that people have to actually present their feelings and represent their constituents later on. We good? The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
4 weeks in a row, Speaker, and the members opposite talk about listening to the protesters. They won't even listen to a member of this House to understand, Speaker, what my constituents, the members of my community, is going. And when did the line cross between being a lawful protest, which we welcome actually, Speaker, in this riding, and it happens all the time, to an illegal protest? Members opposite were out there taking photos and encouraging those protesters to keep honking in the middle of the night. Would the member now denounce those actions?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That's a very good question for his leader, the Prime Minister, when these protests started, the first thing this Prime Minister did was call these people names. He insulted them. I don't think anyone in that member's constituency thinks that the answer for a Prime Minister the response for a Prime Minister to do is to hide and then hurl huge insults, not just saying he disagrees with them, calling them misogynist, racist, their fringe view, they should not be tolerated. So very good question he should ask his own Prime Minister. Why didn't he take action? Why didn't he show leadership? Why didn't he take the high road and try to at least listen to these folks so that they felt that they were respected? Good question for your boss.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the problems in Alberta were resolved without the Emergencies Act. The same Emerson and the Ambassador Bridge. The situation resolved without the Emergencies Act. In Quebec, there were demonstrations. It was resolved without the Emergencies Act. In the Prime Minister's backyard here, there is an occupation. What did the Prime Minister do? First, he insulted them, and then he invoked the Emergencies Act. My question is simple. Between playing Pontius Pilate and the atomic bomb, there is tools that the Prime Minister could have used, like leadership. What does the Leader of the Opposition think of that? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I tell that member thank you for his question. And he may recall I sent a letter very early on to the Prime Minister asking that he meet with the opposition leaders to talk about solutions like the ones that he just spoke about. It's clear that the borders were cleared by police action, and that's a good thing. We believe that these protesters here in Ottawa, these blockades, could have been moved quickly had the Prime Minister shown some leadership, said, hey, I'm hearing you. I disagree with you, but I hear your concerns. We're going to look at removing these mandates. We're going to do it because it's actually scientific to remove them. I guarantee you, Mr. Speaker, that these folks would have moved on had the Prime Minister decided he wanted to actually listen. And what I promise you is we would not be here today invoking an Emergencies Act, which is a sledgehammer on all Canadians.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
It's no secret that the convoy stated their mission, which was to overthrow the government. It sounds ludicrous, but they brazenly posted that on their website, and they reiterated it.
Order, order. I can't hear the question, and I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition can't hear the question. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
It's no secret that the goal of this convoy, posted brazenly on their website, reiterated as recently as earlier this week in a press conference, was to overthrow a democratically elected government. That was their goal. So the interim leader of the Conservative Party says, we have heard you, we will keep standing up for you. Do you regret endorsing a convoy that is attacking the fundamental democracy of our country? Do you regret endorsing and supporting an occupation that has harassed citizens? Do you regret endorsing a movement which has lost...
Order. I know the questions have to come through the chair, and I can't speak on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, but I'll let the Leader of the Opposition answer the question.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, nobody in this House believes that a government should be overthrown, although I have seen that member's colleagues at a number of pro-communist marches, and so not sure if that means he endorses communism. I'll tell you what I know is because when history looks back on this, Conservatives will have stood up with Canadians, millions of Canadians, vaccinated Canadians, Canadians who are blue-collar workers, Canadians who are white-collar workers, Canadians who have had enough of a Prime Minister who has divided, wedged, stigmatized, and traumatized them. And the party that will have stood with that Prime Minister is that member and his NDP colleagues, and it's shameful.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish that I was rising here today to speak about increased inflation. I wish I was here to defend parents and seniors who have suffered greatly since the beginning of the pandemic and who today are dealing with all kinds of serious and grave situations. But because of this Prime Minister, because of his inaction, because he chose to protect his career instead of listening to Canadians, here we are today debating a bill which was invoked. It's been invoked for the first time since it was created in '88 by the Parliament. It's the Emergencies Act that I'm referring to, and obviously this will go down in history, Mr. Speaker, but not for the right reasons. And it's very disappointing, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister had to invoke this to manage the blockades, the protests in downtown Ottawa and at Coutts in Alberta, the cross-border bridge in Emerson, and the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. Colleagues, we have to remember these precedents. And we have to be very careful. However, there are only the blockades in Ottawa that remain. All the other blockades have been dismantled or are being dismantled without resorting to the Emergencies Act. For 13 days, the government took no significant measures to appease these protests, did not listen to the rumblings of discontent, the fatigue, and the demands of the protesters. He decided to go straight to the nuclear option. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister simply did not respect the high threshold that is set out by the Emergencies Act to justify its invocation and its enforcement. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are going to be voting against his decision. Resorting to the Emergencies Act is something that it's one of the most important decisions a parliamentarian can make. The previous act, the War Measures Act, was only used 3 times during the First World War, the Second World War, and during the October crisis in Quebec, and we remember that well. Mr. Speaker, it's our responsibility as parliamentarians to protect democracy first and foremost. That includes the election of elected officials and the rights of citizens to not agree with the government, and their right to be able to express that publicly, Mr. Speaker. These protests have created disturbances for many Canadians, especially people who live in Ottawa, for local businesses. It is very tough for them. They are collateral damage of a situation that goes well beyond Ottawa streets and Ottawa citizens. We all know that, Mr. Speaker, and as we've long said, the Conservatives are the party of law and order. Illegal blockades must come down quickly and peacefully. Mr. Speaker, we have to calm things down, not only in Ottawa, but across the country. Unfortunately, as many experts have said, as many analysts have pointed out, the Prime Minister's actions will have the contrary effect, unfortunately. Let's go back to the beginning. How did all this start? Well, it started with a Prime Minister who chose to turn an election into a political game. He called an election in the midst of a pandemic. And then he decided to oblige Canadians to get vaccinated with no scientific proof that that was the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. We asked him the question. We put the question to the government and to the Minister of Health. On what scientific basis what scientific basis are you using to get truckers vaccinated, to oblige this? But we never got an answer. But we didn't back down. They didn't back down. They maintained this obligation despite all the damage it caused to our economy, to the supply chain, and the scope of the ensuing movement that it created. When the protesters came to Ottawa, the Prime Minister hid. He hid out for an entire week, Mr. Speaker. And then he didn't try to calm things down. He just came out and insulted the protesters. He insulted Canadians who don't agree with him. That's what happened. He said that they were racists, misogynists, and he even said that their viewpoint was unacceptable. But we see that often in this House, Mr. Speaker. Every time we say something that the Prime Minister doesn't agree with, well, he goes straight to the unacceptable accusation. You know, over half of people in Canada, half of Canadians did not vote for him, and yet they're still Canadians. They're people who have the right to their opinions. They have spoken out, and they continue to have the right to do so. It is acceptable to vote against this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. I heard his viewpoints everywhere, in my riding, on social media, over the phone, in emails. All of us, we've gotten tons of emails this week. We've been swamped. People who are speaking out, but there are neighbors, there are voters, there are people who want to be heard, and they should be heard. But, you know, since the Prime Minister doesn't agree with them, Mr. Speaker, well, he doesn't like their opinion, so he decided simply to not listen to them. He's turned a deaf ear. Every time the Prime Minister has an opportunity, he stigmatizes Canadians. There was no representative from their association. He didn't discuss anything in the concerns with the truckers. He didn't even apologize for his insults, that he's insulted all the protesters, and he's insulted people in this House, Mr. Speaker. You know, apologies from the Prime Minister, it's not for people. He doesn't give them to people who disagree with him. He heard that the crisis was getting worse, so he just stayed hidden. He could have intervened. He had a lot of tools at his disposal to intervene. The first tool is himself. You know, he's the head of state. He could have listened to Canadians. That is the very first thing that he should have done. That's the first option he should have used as head of state, to choose to act. He should have acted like a statesman, but he didn't. So instead of listening, he decided to give himself more powers. He decided to broaden the government's powers, Mr. Speaker. That is a bad decision. The Prime Minister's leadership is miserable. It's pathetic in this situation. And this week he even said, invoking the Emergencies Act is never the first thing that the government should do. It shouldn't be the second or the third option. It should be used with moderation and as a last resort, Mr. Speaker. That's what he said. No one thinks that the Prime Minister used any kind of first or second or third option or fourth option even. He has not succeeded in convincing anyone that it is justified for him to resort to the Emergencies Act. Mr. Speaker, just about everyone, experts, police chiefs, analysts, everyone said that he had all the tools at his disposal. Even the premiers didn't want him to use the Emergencies Act. They've said it over and over. We can look after this. Do not throw oil on the fire. That's what they said. By invoking the Emergencies Act, that's what you're doing. That's what they told him, Mr. Speaker. How did the Prime Minister go completely from ignoring the protesters and hiding to the nuclear option of adopting the Emergencies Act? We hope that history will tell us why this happened, because currently the Prime Ministers and his ministers are not telling us why, and currently the crisis that we're in has been directly created by the leadership void, the vacuum left by the Prime Minister. He could have used a reasonable approach. We asked him, give us a plan. a plan to announce the withdrawal, the lifting of obligatory vaccination and the lifting of health restrictions. And that's not unreasonable. All the provinces are doing it right now across the country. But unfortunately, this Prime Minister chose to put his head down, to do nothing, to not listen to the experts, to ignore them. And now he's wondering why the protesters and why Canadians are fed up with his lack of leadership. That's the reality in which we find ourselves. The Prime Minister would rather do what he thinks is right and continues to refuse to give us a plan. Mr. Speaker, the government should not have the power to shut down Canadians' bank accounts. It should not have to resort to the Emergencies Act when there exist other tools to fix this type of crisis in Ottawa. The Prime Minister has failed miserably. And unfortunately, he will be judged not by us, but by the generations of Canadians to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Kings Hants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague across the way for his speech. He talked about leadership, and his party is trying to denounce and support the protest at the same time. It was said that the Prime Minister should show leadership. What measures should the government have taken, or should the government just give in to protesters' demands? What does the member think? The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, as far as I know, unfortunately, the official opposition is the official opposition. We have a Prime Minister who had at his disposal the tools he needed to cooperate with the provinces, to send additional police forces to Ottawa when Ottawa asked for it. There were ministers who could have intervened who did not do so. So the question that the member is asking right now to the official opposition, well, he should ask his own ministers, his own Prime Minister, why was nothing done at the very beginning of this crisis that would have calmed things down? The lack of leadership isn't on this side, Mr. Speaker. It's across the way. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for L'Avignon, Métis, Matane, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's something that makes me angry. When the Prime Minister said that he invoked the Emergencies Act, he said, well, it's going to be geographically targeted, just where we need to apply it. But Premier Legault said, we don't want anything to do with this act on our territory. The National Assembly voted unanimously. We want nothing to do with this. But now we can see that it's localized across Canada. And it's not the first time that the Prime Minister has said one thing and done the opposite. So I would like to know whether he thinks this is a reasonable type of application of this law, or is it unjustified and unjustifiable? The Honourable Member. I'm going to quote Premier Legault of Quebec. Imposing this act will throw oil on the fire by polarizing all Quebecers. It should not apply to Quebec because we don't need it. I think that right now it would not help the social climate. That's what the Premier said. I have quotes like that from the Premier of Manitoba, from the Premier of Prince Edward Island, from the Premier of Alberta. I think it's pretty clear. The Prime Minister, what Premier Legault said, listen, we don't want anything to do with your Emergencies Act. We can look after this all by ourselves. So why isn't he able to do so? Questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, and to the Honourable Member for Megan take care of, I'm actually raising a point that I've heard his leader, the official leader of the opposition, the leader of the opposition party, raise something as a hypothetical, and I want to address it now, and that is this notion that the Prime Minister hid. I think we forget the Prime Minister, and I'm not going to defend all the Prime Minister's actions by any means, but at the moment this convoy started, the Prime Minister had been diagnosed with positive for COVID. Had he gone in to meet with people who were unvaccinated, and had any of them been sickened and died, he could have been charged with manslaughter. Does that not occur to people on the other side as a...
Order. I would really like to hear the... I'm just looking over to the minister. The member completed her question?
Zoom right there.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure everybody listens to the question so that we can get a good answer on it. The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Island.
Speaker, I know this is a difficult time for everyone, but I think that hypothetical and the use of the word hid is again inflaming divisions in this place we shouldn't have. If someone tests positive for COVID, they should not be meeting with anyone, and they certainly shouldn't be threatening the health and safety of people who have chosen not to get vaccinated.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of the pandemic, I've had I don't know how many opportunities to listen to speeches and presentations from my honourable colleague on this little platform, this little computer called Zoom. I've heard her on many occasions, and also members of the Liberal Party on this small screen using Zoom. So hiding means not answering questions. Hiding means not taking a stance. That's what the Prime Minister did when he hid. He shirked his responsibilities. He didn't hide at home. He shirked his responsibilities. He could have taken the floor because he had all the means he needed to do so.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate, l'honorable député de
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to remind our friends across the way that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And I'd like to remind the Conservative Party that I'd like to be able to hear myself as well. The pandemic has caused many victims. People have died. People have contracted major health problems. There are people who live in anxiety, who live in suffering. People have seen their purchasing power plummet because of long-term inflation effects, either structural or contextual. The pandemic has attacked seniors. It has attacked our health system, that of Quebec and the provinces. Now, obviously, given this unprecedented situation, you know, we try. We do what we can. We're not sure if we're doing it right. And sometimes when we try these things, well, you know, we're not sure that it's going to work out. That's true in terms of medical measures, health measures, vaccination. And it's also true with regard to travel restrictions. We understand that. So the answer to all that must be information, communication. So obviously not all things that are disseminated, not all information that is conveyed is correct. But this pandemic was mismanaged. It was intoxicated by one single obsession. The obsession with encroaching on the jurisdiction of Quebec and the provinces. The obsession to even use the pandemic to create multicultural powers, and that has created misunderstanding both in Quebec and in Canada, whereas what we need is clear, factual information. Mr. Speaker, this was also what sowed these protests in the form that we're seeing today. Mr. Speaker, fear is legitimate. Doubt is legitimate. Opposition to a government's policies and ideas is also legitimate. Protesting, speaking out, assembling, all of that is legitimate. Sedition and insurrection, though, are not. Refusing treatment, is that legitimate? Endangering other people's lives by refusing treatment or vaccination, is that legitimate? Yesterday, I was vaccinated for the third time of my own free will. That was my freedom. that I chose to exercise, and thereby I contributed to reestablishing the freedom of other people who are more vulnerable and who are waiting to feel safe again when they leave their homes, especially from long-term care centers. Freedom is a matter of balance, Mr. Speaker, between individual freedoms and collective freedoms. And we need good judgment to establish that. And it's not all political parties who show that good judgment. We need leadership. And the Prime Minister has failed this test of leadership and the test of freedom. Why? Because of his ideology. Because he wants to subject collective freedoms to individual freedoms. He wants to quash the identity of a nation. He wants to talk about a post-national state. And he's continuing on where his father left off, denying Quebec and trying to play down the importance of a Quebec nation. Now, speaking of freedom, that was the aim of the Charter of Freedoms. Individual freedoms, that which denies the French fact, secularism, the freedom of instruction. So, we're hearing a lot of insults, but there's a lot of propaganda that's being thread around. He's trying to denying collective identity, so very naturally, the Prime Minister is defending individuals. And freedom becomes just another catchphrase. There's insufficient information, so now freedom looks like something the right wing would use. And it condones all excesses, it fuels civil disobedience, and it flirts with violence. In addition, it's polluting social media. But the Prime Minister, what he likes to do is nothing. It is in his ideological nature to scorn and inflame differences.
Ottawa is under siege. The flag that is associated to the Prime Minister is everywhere, but he has to take action, but he doesn't know how to do this. So he's pretending to take action. He's putting on a show. He's distracting people and camouflaging his failures. He's tabled a motion that is both heavy and useless. And the Prime Minister keeps repeating that there's no infringement of charter liberties. If it wasn't for this charter, well, our freedoms are being hindered, and he wants to justify the Emergencies Act. He has to explain it, the use of it. The Emergencies Act was not useful at the Ambassador Bridge or at Coutts or to seize arms at these locations. It was not useful in Quebec either. And ironically, because Quebec does not want the Emergency Act to be applied in Quebec, it is the Quebec police that has gone to help out in Ottawa. Ironically. And the Prime Minister wants to skirt the law. This is a Canadian law and in our tradition. But in terms of tradition, Mr. Speaker, the copy is never as good as the original. The National Assembly of Quebec doesn't want the Emergencies Act to be invoked, and Quebec government doesn't want it to be either, and obviously the Bloc doesn't want it to either. The Conservatives in Quebec don't want it to be either. And I'm meeting with the leader of the NDP this afternoon to discuss, to see if we could reach a mutual understanding. Only the Liberals in Ottawa even, well, those in Ottawa want it, but those in Quebec don't. If Ontario wants this law to be applied, it has to be useful. But we could have done things differently, but that's up to them. And Quebec has clearly said they don't want the Act to be invoked. The Prime Minister has failed the liberty test in terms of collective freedoms. And he has a pretty bad balance sheet in this respect. He often fails this freedom test. He abandoned Raif Badawi. He ignored the Uyghurs. He is an accomplice of Spain against the Catalan region. He mistrusts Quebec's freedoms of expression and its desire for secularism. If Quebec doesn't say exactly the same or think exactly same thing as him, and any provinces who don't respect his health conditions, and even in terms of security, the Prime Minister acts first and foremost by interfering. He takes powers that are not his, and he intervenes in an unjustified manner given the current state of things across Canada, except for the crisis that he himself created in Ottawa. He has failed the freedom of expression test as well, because he has infringed our liberties to our worst enemies, the extreme right and ignorance. Liberty is a progressive value, a national value. Freedom is a Quebec value, and it is fed by truth. Vaccination is a tool of freedom. Yes, it isn't perfect, of course, but it is the best of the worst solutions. And the quicker we follow vaccination, improved vaccination, the faster we can live health guidelines. But because of his failure, he's turned his back on those who are sick to manage a crisis that he himself created. I will always defend freedom, Mr. Speaker, particularly those from my nation. Quebec is free to make its choices. Thank you. Questions and comments.
The honourable member for King's Hands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the Bloc Québécois is comparing this measure to the War Measures Act, which is not the case. His public security critic has suggested that this measures does not respect charter rights, which is not the case. It is up to police and provincial law authority. It gives them additional powers so that they can end illegal activity, even in Quebec, and prevent economic damage. Normally, the Bloc would appreciate the idea to have provincial discretion. Why is the Bloc against a reasonable and proportional measure for that province? The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. There's a big difference between offering additional powers to other jurisdictions and grabbing powers from other jurisdictions to give you to your own, to yourself. And once again, this is kind of a tricky exercise that the government is taking. And Mr. Speaker, and when measures are necessary and they are relevant and they do alter liberties, instead of saying that they don't affect our freedoms, you have to justify it. Whether it's justified or not, seizing someone's bank account or preventing them from going down the street, that's not altering someone's freedom. At a certain point, it's clear that this government often says the opposite of what is obvious. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the leader of the Bloc Québécois, what does he think about the balance between the law and the capacity and the resources that are available. We've seen a major issue for the City of Ottawa is in terms of the capacity of removing all these tractor trailers. And does he know that Section 21 of the Criminal Code obliges transportation companies to provide the police with resources when they're asked? And once again, does he agree that there's been a lack of balance between the existing law and available capacities and resources? The Honourable Member for Blanchet. Except, well, if you want to immobilize a tractor trailer, unless you have the police involved, it can be illegal. The Ottawa Police has asked for assistance since they're overwhelmed, and then you don't give them that help. You say that we're going to send RCMP, and the Prime Minister starts to find things that are getting complicated, and that he himself has said that Ottawa Police has all the necessary power to intervene until he realized what he said didn't make sense. Provinces have powers and they have legislative abilities. There are emergency acts in various jurisdictions, and it gives them all the necessary tools. We shouldn't say without this, such laws wouldn't exist. The province could have intervened and can. They could have done that everywhere except for here around the Parliament.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Leader of the Bloc Québécois. I have a question because I am concerned with the law and the geographical issue. What we have in front of us lacks a clear reference to a geographical region. Yesterday, the Prime Minister and other ministers said that the use of the Emergencies Act will include a geographical limit, but I don't find it here. So my question for the Leader of the Bloc is this. If the government amended the Act with the geographical limit, which excluded Quebec, would the Leader of the Bloc think that that would be necessary for the situation here in Ottawa? The Honourable Member for Blanchet. Over the past few years, we've learned one thing, that what we say in general is not always applied as clearly when we write it down. I've learned this from recent experience. When the Prime Minister says something, well, then I have to look at what the text says. What does it say? It says it's applicable everywhere in Canada. There's no nuance that has been added or restrictions. Earlier in English, they said that they would consult and perhaps if they wanted to go somewhere, they would. They could amend the text and recognize provincial jurisdiction, and some provinces said that they would like that. But if they were to withdraw the text and replace it with one that said, here's what we're able and ready to do to help Ottawa right now, to end this political camouflage.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. We can't hear you. Please start again. We still can't hear you. Sorry, we still can't hear you. We'll go to someone else and then we'll try to come back to you. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I think it's clearly a black day for democracy in Canada. In Quebec, the War Measures Act in 1970 was the resulted in great trauma. There were people who were wrongly imprisoned, and it recalls painful memories. In policies, there is legislation, there's the letter of law, there are the different commas and the text, and there's also the spirit of the legislation. We can say that the Emergencies Act is not the same as the War Measures Act, but it reminds Quebecers of their trauma. So when our leader talks about trauma that was experienced in Quebec because of the War Measures Act in 1970, that's obvious. The Honourable Member for Bendayan. What is traumatizing is speaking after that member. But nevertheless, yesterday I asked a member from the government to show some sensitivity. I understand that this doesn't come to them easily because when you ask for an apology, well, we were the last, along with the Acadians, to receive an apology from Canada. And they almost laughed at us when we asked for one, historically. So I'm not expecting any miracles. But let's be somewhat sensitive to the fact that for Quebecers, there's a uncertain relationship, not with the humanitarian role of the army. Yes, we were happy to see them at some point, but when we're talking about an act that shakes freedoms and that looks like the War Measures Act, both in the content of the nature of the act, this concerns us. We have experienced this in the past, so please provide some understanding. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We agree with the fact that the Act should not be applied in Quebec because there's no means to do so. We were ready to support the Bloc's motion on that yesterday. But where I disagree with the leader of the Bloc is the doubtful history that he mentioned to talk about the trauma from the War Measures Act in Quebec, even though there's no common measures with the current act and what happened 50 years ago. So we can't be accused of lacking sensitivity in Quebec because these two acts are not comparable. So I would invite the leader to look at the various provisions of the act and see what that entails. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Humility in Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie doesn't seem to be legal, but I would ask the member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie to listen to the National Assembly. It should also be his friends in Quebec Solidaire are against it. The Liberals are against it, as is the CAQ and the Parti Québécois. The only person in Quebec who is right is the member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. I'm somewhat concerned. But I would like to remind him that the NDP leader in 1970 voted against the War Measures Act.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a critical moment in our history. In a few weeks, we will enter the third year of this pandemic. Canadians are tired of a pandemic that has created so much loss and such sacrifice for so many. Canadians are frustrated that so many have found themselves worse off, while those at the very top have only increased their wealth and power. And many are afraid of the next wave, of the next variant, but also afraid of the other crises we face, of fires and floods caused by the climate change destroying their homes and their livelihoods, of losing those they love to a toxic drug supply, of not being able to get the care they need or that their loved ones need when they need it. But neither fear, frustration, or fatigue have won over Canadians' fundamental desire to take care of one another. We are here today at this moment because of a result of a failure of leadership. People were abandoned by government that argued over jurisdiction rather than helping people. People were abandoned because governments didn't take this convoy and its impact on people seriously. And they were abandoned by the police, some of whom stood with the occupiers and the occupation. It should never have come to this. It should have never come to a point in time where thousands of workers lost their wages because of blockades at bridges. Thousands of workers lost wages because of blockades of one of the busiest shopping centers in Ottawa, retail workers, people who are already precariously employed. It should never come to the point where residents, families, children were harassed, intimidated, terrorized by the convoy. It should have never come to this. Many people right now are rightly concerned about the impact of the Emergencies Act, that it might crack down on protests in the future. What we're dealing with is not a protest. It is not peaceful. The organizers of this illegal occupation have been clear from the beginning. They haven't shied away from this. They have been brazen about it. They came here to overthrow a democratically elected government. It is a movement funded by foreign influence, and it is fed on disinformation. Its goal is to disrupt our democracy. We share the concern of many Canadians that the government may misuse the powers in the Emergencies Act. So I want to be very clear. We will be watching. We will withdraw our support if at any point we feel these powers are being misused. I've been at many protests and strikes, and I've witnessed the full and brutal power of the police being used against peaceful protesters. So I want to make this clear as well. Indigenous land defenders, climate change activists, workers fighting for fairness, and any Canadian using their voice to peacefully demand justice should never be subject to the Emergencies Act. New Democrats will never support that. What has become very clear in this crisis is that there needs to be as well a serious examination of policing in Canada. Occupiers get hugs from the police, while Indigenous and racialized protesters are met with the barrel of a gun. Yep. There are several accounts, very troubling accounts, of current and former law enforcement and military members involved in these occupations. One of the requirements of the Emergencies Act is that after its invocation, there is a public inquiry into its use. This must include a full public inquiry into the role of law enforcement in these occupations, both in their support for the occupiers and in many cases the refusal to enforce the law.
The use of the Emergencies Act is because there is a failure by the government. They never should have gotten to this point. But the situation of a crisis in Ottawa requires additional action in order to avoid something serious from happening. We take the use of the Emergencies Act very seriously. No one wants to see a situation like that which occurred in 1970 happen again. Some people remember the use of the War Measures Act in 1970, the army in the streets. Many people are concerned that this kind of situation could occur again, and I understand those concerns. That is why the use of the Emergencies Act must be done carefully and with a great deal of seriousness. We are reassured that the use of the military is not being considered, and the rights of under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will be maintained. Arbitrary arrest will not be justified under the Act. The NDP believes that there is no justification at present to use this Emergencies Act in Quebec. We are asking the Prime Minister for guarantees that the emergency measures will only be used where they are really required. The NDP is prepared at any time to use the mechanisms available to it. We're not giving the government a blank check, and we will keep our eyes on the government to avoid any abuse or misuse.
We've heard a lot about divisions in our country. That division, sadly, has been fed and amplified by members in this House. That has to end. Using a pandemic as a political wedge to score points off your opponents to try to win a leadership or an election is wrong. And frankly, dangerous. This virus doesn't care who you voted for. Wearing a mask isn't a partisan activity. Vaccines save lives. And the vast majority of Canadians and members of Parliament know this and have supported vaccination efforts. We cannot let Canadians' trust in science and public health be eroded by political opportunism. The pandemic is changing, and our response has to change as well. Restrictions are being lifted. We need a plan to get out of the pandemic, to get to the end of the pandemic. A plan based on science and our fundamental responsibility to take care of one another. Canadians who have done everything asked of them now want to know what to do next. Canadians have followed the rules, but they need to believe that restrictions are fair and make sense. We know that things can change quickly. New variants may appear, the evidence may change. But without a clear plan, confusion, disinformation, and resentment grows. We believe that a plan to get to the end of the pandemic, to get us out of this pandemic, has to include the urgent repair of our healthcare system so that people can get the care when they need it. It has to include finishing the job of vaccination, especially of our children. And we have to make sure there's global access to vaccines so we avoid future variants and waves of infection. And we need to move forward on solving the problems that this pandemic has only made worse. The reality is, working people have paid the price of this pandemic. While big companies took government money and gave out shareholder dividends and CEO bonuses, frontline workers got sick because they had to work without sick leave. Parents struggled to keep their kids at home while schools were closed and big box stores stayed open. You are right to be angry that life has only gotten harder over these past 2 years, that it is almost impossible to buy a home, to keep a roof over your head, or to rent a decent place to live, because wealthy speculators are driving up the cost of housing. You are right to be angry that the cost of groceries go up to feed the profits of wealthy corporate grocery stores. You are right to be angry that you work hard and pay your taxes, but the super wealthy and big businesses don't pay their fair share. And you are right to be angry that your life has become harder while the super wealthy and powerful have only added to their wealth and power. I'm angry too. And when I get angry, I fight. But I learned long ago that my anger and my fight is not with the powerless. Your anger, your fight is not with Canadians. It's with those at the very top, the powerful who have built a system rigged against working people. We can change this. We can change this, but only if we come together to fight for a Canada that doesn't leave people behind while others profit. The story of this pandemic is not one of division, it's one of solidarity. It's a story of frontline healthcare workers showing up day after day in impossible situations. It is a story of grocery workers and farmers and truckers keeping us fed, of teachers doing their best to connect with children through screens. Our story is one of neighbors helping each other get vaccinated, helping each other when they're in need. We will not let the last few weeks define this pandemic for us. Canadians have sacrificed too much, lost too many loved ones, missed out on too many moments to allow our country to become divided by hate and violence. Don't let your anger turn into hatred. We know that hatred is like a fire. When it's allowed to grow, it will consume everything. As I hold my daughter, I often think about the world I want for her. I want her to walk through the world without fear. I want her to always feel like she belongs. I don't want her to face the same struggles that I have. I believe this is what we all want for our children. This is my hope, that our decisions in the coming days are guided by this desire to build a better and safer, more just world where all of our children believe that they belong. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Burnaby South for his very thoughtful presentation, and also want to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his baby very recently. I do want to note that I've seen the member on many occasions engaging with protesters over the many years I've known him, and in this particular time he hasn't. And I know the opposition has advised that the Prime Minister engage with the illegal blockades that are here, and I want his reflections on engagement with those who are here in the illegal protests and the illegal blockades, what message that would send if the Prime Minister or him were to engage these folks.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
We've been very clear that this is a group, the convoy, that wants to undermine our democracy, and that it's not a group that we can negotiate with or work with. What we do need to do is acknowledge that there is real frustration amongst Canadians, those that have done everything they can to get vaccinated, to follow public health guidelines, and they are frustrated. Canadians are frustrated, and they want to know what the plan is to get out of this pandemic, and that plan has to include making sure we invest in our healthcare system so it's no longer pushed to the brink of collapse, That plan has to include responding to the frustrations of Canadians who can't find homes that they can afford, who are worried about the cost of living going up and can't find a job that pays the bills. We have to respond to those real frustrations that Canadians are feeling. That real anger has to be responded by us working together to find real solutions to solve those problems.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was disappointed to see the stand that the leader of the NDP and the NDP party have taken on an issue that deals with the fundamental civil liberties of Canadians. What has happened to the party of Tommy Douglas? What has happened to the party of Jack Layton that fought against C-51, that fought against the War Measures Act? What has changed? Why have the NDP, they're just trying to split hairs here, Mr. Speaker, but why have the NDP abandoned one of their fundamental principles?
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Let's be really clear. We are in this national crisis because of failure to respond to how serious this crisis is. All levels of government failed to take this convoy seriously. They failed in their leadership, and that's why this crisis became so bad. In order to fix this crisis, it has to be taken seriously now. And I believe to take it seriously, enacting powers, limited and specific to deal with this crisis, are appropriate. We do so reluctantly, and we will closely monitor to ensure that there is no overreach. And we know that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to apply, and that legitimate, peaceful protests demanding justice should continue and will be protected.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the Minister of Public Safety, who said that he was proud of supporting the Emergencies Act, I am fundamentally convinced that it's not with a great deal of happiness that the NDP leader is supporting it. It wouldn't be consistent with the history of their party or consistent with the legacy of Tommy Douglas, which has already been mentioned. We could spend days talking amongst ourselves, but there'll be a vote later this week. There will be developments possibly in the situation of concern, and I'd like to know whether there are things that could make the NDP leader change his mind, or if the door is definitively closed with regard to his support for the Emergencies Act. The honourable member for Burnaby South. I want to be clear. We are not proud of supporting these measures. We are reluctant to support them. It is a clear example of the government's failure that we find ourselves in this situation now. We are giving our support with reticence. We will continue to be vigilant in order to ensure that the measures are applied as necessary only. There is an emergency, however, and action needs to be taken. The governments in place did not take action. It's a failure of their leadership, and we want to resolve this crisis and use the powers. If there is misuse, we will remove our support, or if they are not needed any longer. Questions and comments?
Comments. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we had the lowest death rate in the Western world, the highest level of vaccinations. The solidarity of Canadians was incredible. And yet the absolute failure and the exploitation of fear by members in this House, by the Leader of the Opposition who said they wanted to exploit this, by the failure of the Prime Minister to stand up and show vision, by the failure of police to defend people in the streets. We should never have been at this moment where we're looking like a failed state. I want to ask the leader of the New Democratic Party, what steps will he take to hold this government accountable? Because they have failed us at every step of the way in this crisis. How can we trust them at this point? How can we say to Canadians, we will make their streets safe, we will return the rule of law, but we will make sure that they are accountable? How will we do that?
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
I really appreciate the question from the honourable member. I want to be clear to Canadians that we take this step with a lot of reluctance. We are not in any way proud that we're at a point in our country's history where the Emergencies Measures Act has to be implemented. We think this is a failure of leadership that got us to this point, a failure of taking the convoy seriously, and people were abandoned. Workers were abandoned. Residents of Ottawa were abandoned. And as a result, we're in this crisis. So we are going to support this measure, but we're going to do so with a lot of vigilance. We're going to pay close attention to this implementation of the Emergency Measures Act, and we are prepared to withdraw our support at any moment that it becomes clear that there's an abuse of power. We have the powers to do so. There are a number of tools at our disposal, and we'll be paying very close attention to the way this Emergency Act is used, and we want to make sure it's used only for the goal of dealing with this convoy and this national crisis so that Canadians can have restored confidence in the ability of this country to be able to function properly, to protect them, to keep them safe.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to go back to the Leader of the NDP's comments about the real story. Over the last couple of years, there have been so many heroic moments that we have witnessed where people from all regions of the country have stepped up, and that's really needs to be acknowledged right up front. You know, it's an unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. You know, it wasn't that long ago, a week ago, where we had literally $500 million worth of trade between Canada and U.S. being held hostage to convoy blockades, having a very negative impact on issues like jobs and so forth. We've had some opposition parties be inconsistent with their messaging, which has also caused some issues. And I'm wondering if my friend could provide his thoughts in terms of how important it is. Yes, we recognize how Canadians have contributed, but at this point in juncture of time that we have to do the things to protect our families, businesses, and trade lines, economic lines.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you for the question, and it gives an opportunity to talk about the incredible sacrifice of so many people. I think of all the frontline workers, all those frontline workers that kept us going in the most difficult parts of this pandemic. The retail workers, the logistic workers, the truck drivers, the frontline healthcare workers, and how it's been so difficult for these frontline workers. And in a lot of ways, these frontline healthcare workers and frontline workers were abandoned as well. They were the most important workers in some cases that were paid the least. And so we fought to make sure that they were recognized not just with their hard work and sacrifice, but with fair compensation. And that has to continue. The healthcare workers right now are struggling. They are at their brink. Nurses have told us about the crisis in healthcare. So we have to make sure we're supporting them with real investments. And we are in a real crisis. The fact that one of the busiest borders in North America could be shut down, causing thousands and thousands of workers to lose their wages is unacceptable. It is wrong. We need to make sure workers are protected, and that's why we reluctantly support this measure to make sure this convoy is ended and that workers are protected, that people are protected, the residents of Ottawa are supported. We're standing with them.
For a quick short one, the honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. It's interesting that the honourable leader of the NDP has spoken about the division of the government, and yet he has consistently propped up this government that has chosen to divide. Now, in his speech, he spoke about the fact that the Emergencies Act should not touch on Quebec, and yet he is supporting legislation which, theoretically, could freeze bank accounts in Quebec. So, will he support that aspect of the Act because it cannot be separated from the remainder? Yes or no?
The honourable member for Burnaby South in 30 seconds.
We want to make sure that this act is used in a way that stops a convoy, and it's not used where it's not necessary. But I want to be very clear about division. I certainly have said that in this House, divisions have been flamed, and that the story of this pandemic is one of solidarity. But I want to be clear. Conservatives have purposely tried to use this convoy as an opportunity to score points and cause problems for the Liberals. The Liberals have also looked at this as an opportunity to divide and wedge. And I'm saying that it is wrong to do that. We cannot be wedging people on a thing that is not partisan. This is a crisis that we have to come together on. The pandemic is one where we all have to tackle together, and it should not be something to score points on.
Prise du débat, continuing debate, the Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be splitting my time with the President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness. And I see that it's now Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased and honored, but also do this with a deep sense of obligation to rise today to speak to the invocation of the Emergencies Act by our government and to the motion in this House to affirm the government's decision. Canada is a rule of law country. By declaring a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act, we followed the law and we are acting within it. There are clear conditions set out in the Emergencies Act in order for a public order emergency to be declared. Our government believes those conditions have been met and that those same conditions required the Government of Canada to act. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence.
The Emergencies Act exists since 1988 and replaced the War Measures Act. It differs from the War Measures Act in two significant ways. First, the Emergencies Act contains a number of parameters and safeguards, including parliamentary review. Second, the measures taken under this Act must respect the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
The preamble to the Emergencies Act states, and whereas the Governor and Council in taking such special temporary measures would be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged even in a national emergency. Madam Speaker, any and all of our government action will be subject to the Charter, and it is my job as Attorney General to ensure this. I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. There is therefore a further check in the parliamentary oversight process as well. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked in specific, serious circumstances that amount to a national emergency. In order to meet the thresholds for a national emergency, 3 conditions must be met. First, we must be in a situation that either seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and exceeds the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. Second, the provinces and territories' capacity to handle the situation must be considered insufficient or show gaps. And third, we must conclude that the situation cannot be handled adequately under any other Canadian law, including provincial or territorial laws. Our government believes these conditions were met, and yesterday we tabled an explanation of the reasons for issuing the declaration as required by the Act. We also tabled yesterday, as required, a report on any consultation with the provinces with respect to the declaration. I would especially like to highlight the support of British Columbia, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador, as noted in the document of invoking the Act to respond to this national emergency. Une fois l'urgence déclarée,
once the emergency is declared, the Emergencies Act allows the federal government to adopt decrees or regulations that are required to intervene. Our government respects Canadians' rights and freedoms as protected by the Charter, and it is our intent to only use the powers necessary, reasonable, measured, and necessary powers to solve the crisis swiftly under Section 1 of the Charter.
Our government has introduced targeted orders under the Act. While the Act technically applies to all of Canada, we have been very careful to tailor orders to be as focused as possible, and only in those places affected by blockades and illegal occupations will we see any change at all. We have introduced the following measures to bring the situation under control. Temporary regulation and prohibition of public assemblies that lead to a breach of the peace and go beyond lawful protest. The situation in Ottawa and blockades at certain border crossings have gone far beyond lawful protest. Temporarily designating and securing places where blockades are to be prohibited. This could include borders, approaches to borders, critical infrastructure, hospitals, and democratic institutions. Temporarily directing persons to render essential services to relieve impacts of blockades on Canada's economy. This could include tow trucks and their drivers, for compensation, of course. Temporarily authorizing or directing financial institutions to render essential services to relieve the impact of blockades, including regulating and prohibiting the use of property to fund or support the blockades. Temporarily enabling the RCMP to enforce municipal bylaws and provincial offences where required. And finally, temporary imposition of fines or imprisonment for contravention of any order or regulation made under Section 19 of the Emergencies Act. Madame la Présidente, nous traversons une période.
Madam Speaker, we are living an extraordinary period, and the Government of Canada has pledged to respect and protect individual rights while maintaining public order. This includes all measures taken by the Canadian government under the Emergencies Act, including orders or actions of government representatives.
To repeat what I previously stated, it is my responsibility and commitment as Attorney General of Canada to ensure that all steps taken by our government are consistent with the Charter as required by the Act. The Emergencies Act, Madam Speaker, also contains a number of significant limits, checks, and safeguards. As required by the Act, on several occasions over the past week, the Prime Minister and members of Cabinet consulted with the Premiers and members of their respective governments. Having now declared a public order emergency, we tabled the declaration in Parliament, as required, within 7 days. And in fact, we did so as quickly as possible, well before the 7 days, tabling yesterday for discussion today so that Parliament could perform its important oversight role. In the coming days, a parliamentary committee will be struck to provide oversight while the emergency is in effect. This declaration only lasts for 30 days, unless renewed. However, we can, and we sincerely hope to, revoke the emergency much sooner. Le Parlement a le pouvoir.
Parliament has the power to repeal a decree which ensures that all measures taken will be done so responsibly, moderately, and while respecting the criteria established.
2 days for review of parliamentarians, as was done yesterday. Parliament has the power to amend or revoke any order made under the Act. In closing, I want to address two critiques of the official opposition. They say this declaration is unnecessary. The illegal blockades and occupations are ending. I say, look outside. They are not. I say, look at the streets of Winnipeg. The ones that have ended did so after the Prime Minister announced we were moving to declare a public order emergency. We are achieving what we intended to achieve with these measures, and we're doing it in a most measured and responsible way. We have seen further how fluid the situation is. Since we declared this emergency, we have seen other potential blockades stopped. We want law enforcement to have the necessary tools for a limited time to ensure we do not have a repeat of any of the blockades. The official opposition is talking about rights. On this side of the House, we take rights seriously. So did the progressive Conservative government that introduced the Emergencies Act and ensured it was Charter compliant. That was the right thing to do. We are invoking this act to end illegal blockades and occupations. We are invoking it to restore the rights of those who cannot walk safely on the streets of downtown Ottawa. We are invoking it to protect the rights of workers to earn a living, of businesses to serve the public, for people to move freely across international borders. Let's not confuse illegal blockades and occupations with lawful protest. We know what a lawful protest looks like. It does not look like what is happening on Wellington Street or what transpired in Coutts or in Emerson. So we have declared a public order emergency to help law enforcement deal with these issues quickly and to protect us from them happening again. Our goal, Madam Speaker, is to see order restored and for this emergency declaration to be lifted as soon as possible. Thank you. Merci.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Act expressly prohibits violation of Charter rights. The declaration put forward by the government assumes power to regulate or prohibit private transfers of funds to protesters, including the ability to mandate the reporting of such transfers and freezing of accounts without judicial oversight. How is this measure compliant with Section 8 Charter rights to be free from unreasonable search and seizure?
Well, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
I thank the honourable member for the question, Madam Speaker. Indeed, this Act is compliant with Section 8 of the Charter against unreasonable search and seizure. It is an extension of procedures and practices that already exist with respect to anti-terrorism financing and money laundering, Madam Speaker. So we are extending these practices and procedures that already exist, that are already Charter compliant, and to this other situation, i.e. funding illegal blockades and protests, and we are going to do it in a reasonable manner. It will be Charter compliant, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député d'Avignon.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Avignon, Métis, Matapédia. I'd like to thank the Minister for his speech. I think we all agree on this side of the House that this is a last resort, and I feel that the current situation shows us that we're not at that point. There are a number of other tools that could have been used prior to this, and I believe that we're sort of playing down the importance of the Emergencies Act. And I'm no lawyer, but we know perfectly well that there are tools under the Criminal Code that could have been used well before coming to the Emergencies Act. For example, charging people criminally who are blocking the streets. So why didn't we do that? I'd like him to explain then why those tools were not used before getting to the Emergencies Act. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. What we found from the beginning of the crisis, and obviously we've worked with the governments across Canada and with the RCMP. The RCMP has also worked with the other police forces. And what we saw is that there were gaps. We had to work together. And so what we did with these measures, which did not exist before, is we gave other tools. We were able to give other tools to police forces across Canada in each jurisdiction, in order to better supervise their situation using more effective tools to ensure that these situations are better managed. So we're filling in the gaps, Madam Speaker.
James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been here for much of the last 3 weeks, and what I've seen in Ottawa is a complete failure of civic officials and a complete failure of the police. This should never have been allowed to spiral. We saw in Quebec City and Toronto, the police did their job. We saw at the Ambassador Bridge the ridiculous situation that our bridge could be shut down for 8 days without action. So now we're having to take these measures. And I want to ask the minister, because he's talking about anti-terrorism measures. Is the government able to tell this House that they have evidence that there is terrorism and extremism, that they can justify this, or are we just having to clean up the mess for the failure of what happened here in Ottawa?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, delivered with his usual passion in this important circumstance. Madam Speaker, I mentioned terrorism as part of the financing. This isn't a terrorism act. We took measures that had been applied to terrorism. We've applied it to other illegal activity. But I'm not equating this to terrorism. What we have done is declare a public order emergency based on the reasons we gave in the declaration that we have made. They include the very deleterious economic impact to the kinds of workers that the honourable member has tried to protect throughout his whole career. Think of auto workers in southwestern Ontario or Niagara. Think of beef farmers. Think of pork farmers out west whose supply chains were blocked in trading with our largest trading partner. Madam Speaker, we have declared a public order emergency based on those very serious grounds. We needed to act. We had been there from the beginning. We saw gaps. We filled them. Now we've given better tools to the police.
Debate, the Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness and President of the Queen's Privy Council.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it is a privilege
to have the opportunity to rise today as the Minister of Emergency Preparedness to speak to the importance and necessity of the motion before the House. But, Madam Speaker, let me also acknowledge that the fact that we are all in this House, that elected representatives from across Canada have come to debate this important measure, is evidence of the strength and resiliency of our democratic institutions, Madam Speaker. And although the subject of today's debate is a solemn one, I think it is also evidence that should give us strength, resolve, and hope. Madam Speaker, let me begin my remarks by acknowledging the impact that these blockades and demonstrations have had on Canadian citizens, particularly for the people of Ottawa, who have been subject to intimidation and threats, a disruption of the course of their lives that, frankly, Madam Speaker, is unacceptable. Among the most important freedoms that we covered and protect in this country is the freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. Lawful, peaceful protest. But, Madam Speaker, it's also been said, your freedom to swing your fist ends at the end of my nose. And what we have seen, unfortunately, over the past 3 weeks is those rights have been exceeded and abused to the point that it's put Canadians in harm's way. Madam Speaker, I also want to speak briefly about the impact of the blockades that were taking place at vital trade corridors in this country, our international borders. Madam Speaker, when the protesters decided to go to our borders, we need to recognize and acknowledge they were going for the throat. They were going to cut off the supply of goods and services that our country relies on. When they stopped parts from coming across that border at the Ambassador Bridge, they shuttered factories. They idled workers. They damaged the reputation of Canada as a safe and stable place to invest. They hurt Canadians. It was clearly their intent. It is clearly what they were doing. And, Madam Speaker, it had to stop. And we saw the same targeted approach to hurt Canadian interest, to harm their fellow citizens in Coutts, Alberta, in South Surrey, British Columbia, in Emerson, certainly at the Ambassador Bridge, a number of feints at other border points. This was not by accident. They didn't just wander into those spaces. They went for the throat of this country. And, Madam Speaker, they created an emergency that we had to respond to. And, Madam Speaker, for the first time, we have come to the difficult decision to invoke the authorities of the Emergency Act. And I want to assure this House, from the very outset, our government recognized the significance of this decision, the heavy responsibility that would come with pursuing it. Not just the responsibility of this government, but of this House. We approached the process with caution and with care. It was essential that we explore all options available to us, Madam Speaker. We looked at everything very closely. We looked at our existing legislation. We looked at the regulations that support the Department of Justice officials, with the support of our Department of Justice officials, to see what additional federal supports would be required. We examined existing municipal, provincial, and federal authorities. Madam Speaker, I think it's rather evident. The threat of parking tickets did not deter those trucks in Ottawa. The threat of the enforcement of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act did not deter those commercial carriers from coming down our highways and using their vehicles, which are licensed under that legislation, to cause harm to Canadians. And it has also become clear of the limitations of even the authorities enshrined within federal law and the criminal code that our law enforcement officials were struggling. One of the things that became evident, and I'll give you two examples that I hope would be helpful to the Parliament in consideration of the necessity for these measures. One of the challenges that our law enforcement officials had, and not just our law enforcement officials, but those who are tasked with gathering and analyzing financial intelligence through FinTrack. Unfortunately, the funding associated to these actions which in many cases have been clearly criminal and harmful to Canadians, was opaque. And it became very clear when our officials came to us and said they did not have the tools that they needed to provide the necessary and appropriate scrutiny of the source of that funding, and they did not have the tools to bring the accountability and even the consequences that were required to do their jobs. We listened, Madam Speaker. We listened to what they needed. We looked at the important Ontario, for example, declared an emergency and brought forward really important and useful regulations. But they couldn't do that because it was our responsibility. And so we considered that. We listened. Another example, Madam Speaker, and this may sound trivial, but it was significant. Jurisdictions right across the country. I heard from my counterpart and colleague, the minister responsible in Alberta, who for weeks has been asking for help to get tow trucks down to Coutts, Alberta, to haul those trucks away. And yet the tow truck industry in Alberta, like in Ontario, like right across the country, as a result of threats and intimidation, they were afraid to do their job. We needed that equipment, we needed those drivers, we needed their ability to remove those vehicles. But Madam Speaker, they were intimidated and afraid. And so we brought forward in these measures an authority to not to compel them, but to really authorize them to do what we all needed them to be done. And Madam Speaker, I just might submit to you all, these measures work. People who knew the gaps in our laws, the gaps in law enforcement's response, they were exploiting it. And when we closed that gaps, they went to school, and we saw evidence of it in Coutts. Now, I don't want to minimize the importance of the RCMP investigation. And by the way, I'm not going to comment on any aspect of their investigation or the prosecution that will follow. It's totally inappropriate for a minister to do so. But I want to thank them for doing their job, and I want to thank God that they were able to do it safely. That eliminated part of the threat at Coutts. But when we announced on Monday that we were coming for the source of their funding, that there were going to be real consequences, financial consequences for their actions, they scurried away. And that's exactly what we needed them to do. They did exactly the same thing in Emerson, Manitoba. And even though we've seen yesterday in Windsor, some of them were going back because this is the way they can most effectively attack this country. They were stopped. They were stopped by effective law enforcement. And so, Madam Speaker, we have brought forward these measures. But let me also assure all my colleagues in this House, these measures must always be charter compliant. Our expectation is that our law enforcement officials will do their job, the job we all need them to do, but they will always do it mindful of their responsibility to uphold the rule of law, to effect their lawful purpose with a minimum amount of force, to do the work right. And I also want to assure this House, Madam Speaker, we'll be there to support them. We'll be there to support them. When they say we need tools, we'll give them the tools to do the job. And when they say we need resources, we'll provide those resources to do the job. Madam Speaker, every order of government and every person in this House has a responsibility to stand up with resolve and determination and to do what is necessary to protect Canada's interests. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sturgeon Ribbon Parker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would note that the Deputy Director of Intelligence for Fintrack, Barry McKillop, would disagree with the minister's suggestion that there is extremist financing of the convoy. But I'll move on to my question. Back in January through March 2020, as the minister said, these people came for the throat. What happened to the throat of our country when our railways were being blockaded, when our pipelines were being blockaded? We couldn't even get propane to Quebec in the middle of the winter, risking the lives of so many seniors. The port of Metro Vancouver was blockaded. And now this government said we needed to initiate dialogue. We needed to work with these people to come to a peaceful resolution. What is any different with this current situation that we're facing? Why is the Emergencies Act needed?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me speak to the member's first point, because I heard him ask the question before, and perhaps he hasn't been satisfied with the answer. I understand, because I also speak to Fintrack often, and I've worked with them for decades. They didn't have the evidence because they didn't have the tools to collect the evidence. We listened to them. They said it's opaque. We don't have the tools to examine cryptocurrency wallets, for example. And we said, we hear you. You don't have the evidence, we'll give you the tools to go collect the evidence because it's necessary to protect Canadians. So, Madam Speaker, the member's argument against these measures is clearly a little bit shallow. And he needs to recognize he's right. We didn't have that information, now we're getting that information. It's what our law enforcement officials need to protect the country.
The honourable member from Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We agree that the situation is serious. The problem is that for more than 2 weeks, only the opposition said it was an emergency. The Prime Minister gave up on his obligation to use the tools he had at his disposition. Quebecers and Canadians deserve better. I would like to know if the Honourable Minister is proud to be seated aside a Prime Minister of last resort.
Minister.
I want to assure the member, not only am I proud, it is the honour of my life to be a member of this government serving Canadians. But, Madam Speaker, I also want to be very clear. We have been seized from the very first moment in supporting law enforcement's efforts, but not also the efforts of our municipal and provincial partners. We've been working closely with provincial governments right across the country, including in Quebec. And, Madam Speaker, I want to also take this opportunity, if I may, to acknowledge that we respect very much the jurisdiction of provinces and territories over policing in their jurisdiction, as I'm sure they recognize and respect our responsibility to maintain the integrity and security of our borders. Madam Speaker, all orders of government have a responsibility to protect Canadians, and we'll all work together to do it.
The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Madam Speaker, I understand and share the concerns that people have about the potential long-term impacts of the use of emergency measures legislation, and in particular, as it relates to the expansion of the institution of policing, given their past abuses and overreach against legitimate political actions by Indigenous, racial and climate justice activists and workers. And yet, with the capital and country in crisis, Canadians are feeling abandoned by their local police services, who have repeatedly been caught on video, compromised, and at times seem to be working in collusion with the insurrectionist occupation. Madam Speaker, the last Royal Commission on Policing was in 1962. Will the Minister of Public Safety commit to establishing a national commission on policing that would review the duties assigned to the police and their corresponding budgets? And will the minister commit to a secretariat or some other office to report on the radicalization and use of public resources in security forces for undemocratic ends?
Minister.
Well, I thank my colleague for the question, and I think one of the things that has become quite apparent, and I've heard concern across the country as well, an overwhelming desire that the police in this country do their job, and that they do it right. Madam Speaker, that they do it in a way which is compliant with all of our laws, with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that their response is measured, thoughtful, proportional, and effective. Madam Speaker, and we're working hard to make sure they have the tools and the support that they need. But I will also say, I spent 40 years in policing. Policing must be always accountable to the people they serve, because the most important tool that the police have is the trust and confidence of the people they serve. And, Madam Speaker, we'll always work to maintain that trust and confidence.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Minister of Emergency Preparedness for his comments this morning. My question is with respect to what I'm hearing. I appreciated his sharing the care and caution that this is being applied with. The Prime Minister shared a more targeted approach, but I need to also reconcile that with what I'm reading in the regulations we've been provided with, mention of critical infrastructure quite broadly. I share the concerns of the member from Burnaby South, for example, with respect to how this could be applied in future to Indigenous land defenders, to climate activists. Could he clarify the difference between the more targeted approach we're hearing and the words we're seeing here?
Honourable Minister, in 30 seconds or less.
I want to thank the member for the question, and I understand the concern. I want to provide him with reassurance. These measures are time limited. They are subject to parliamentary and judicial scrutiny, and we will only use these measures as long as they are required. We recognize their extraordinary nature. They have to be subject to the scrutiny of this House. It's in the law. And we will only use them as long as they are required, and we will always ensure that they are compliant with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Unlike the Prime Minister and ministers across, it actually gives me no pleasure to rise to speak on the matter at hand. The invocation of the Emergencies Act earlier this week, for the first time in Canadian history, is a significant moment, and it's not a moment to be pleased about. It's a solemn moment. It's a moment where we have to ask ourselves, how did we get to the situation we're here in the first place? And when we examine the evidence of how we got to this situation, I don't think there's much for this government to be proud of. Now, the Conservatives thoughtfully considered the justifications written in law and given by this government for the enacting of the Emergencies Act. This government has based their justification on one provision, that a public order emergency exists throughout Canada. This claim is not supported by the evidence. Yes, we have seen border blockades in at least 4 provinces, and we have seen a persistent and now declared illegal protest in Ottawa. Before the Emergencies Act was invoked, the blockades at the borders and across Canada were lifted, or were well into the process of being lifted. So the government trying to claim credit after the fact is completely absurd. The Emergencies Act is now being used solely for the purpose of addressing the situation in Ottawa, not throughout Canada as defined by the Act. Now, a key part of the threshold for enacting these measures is that existing laws and capabilities have proven insufficient for dealing with the problem. Madam Speaker, existing laws are well equipped to deal with these situations. They were well equipped to deal with the situation at Coutts, Emerson, at the Ambassador Bridge, and I submit that they are well equipped to be used here in Ottawa. The Minister of Justice said earlier, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, that they were required to pass this so they could requisition essential services like tow trucks. But it has been noted by many that under the criminal code, police already have the authority to requisition such services under pain of criminal sanction. That was before the Emergencies Act was brought in. So this argument that the Emergencies Act was necessary is completely absurd. I also want to note that I will be splitting my time with my honourable colleague from Regina Cabell. Now, the police already had the power to compel many of these services. The police already had the power to be coordinated with the RCMP, with the OPP, and the various police forces and national security forces throughout Canada. They have measures existing under the criminal code, mischief, intimidation, to be used against illegal protesters and blockades. Now, the government has used an argument where they're citing potential acts and threats of violence against Canadians and critical infrastructure. And this is not just any violence, they're saying. This is violence intended for the furtherance of an ideological and political objective. I'm very concerned with the language that this government is beginning to use, because that language is very similar to the language used under terrorism laws. The definition of terrorism is the use of violence to advance a political or ideological agenda. This government is using terrorism legislation against Canadian protesters. Wow. There is very little evidence that there was a serious threat to persons and critical infrastructure from these protests. There was a short-term risk. It was dealt with by law enforcement. I am very concerned, I'll address the member's question there, Ms. Heckel. I am very concerned about the situation that occurred around Coutts, Alberta, where a small group of militants were arrested with firearms and with the intent to do harm. I am so thankful for law enforcement, for their efforts in taking down this very real threat. And I am so confident in our law enforcement because I know they have been planning this operation for weeks. They have likely infiltrated this group. They had a plan in place, and they had the appropriate tools and expertise to deal with this dangerous situation and diffuse it before it became a very real and dangerous situation. And the fact is, Madam Speaker, that they did this before the imposition of the Emergencies Act. Clearly, they had the tools. This undermines the government's complete argument that they are justified because there were tools that were insufficient to deal with the problems. The tools have been insufficient. The threshold has not been met. I want to address some comments that have been made by this government. The Minister of Public Safety at a press conference stated very clearly and definitively that there is a connection between that militant faction at Coutts and protesters here in Ottawa. He declined to provide any evidence to back up that assertion. He was asked repeatedly by media to back up that assertion, and he failed to back up that claim. His only evidence was citing social media posts and a general tone that has been seen in protests across Canada. Now, this government has been very quick to label protesters and anyone who would oppose their political agenda. Even before the protests began, the Prime Minister called people who oppose mandatory vaccinations, which the Prime Minister did earlier in 2021, He has called them racist, misogynist, among other epithets. Now, since the beginning of the protests, the government has sought to brand and label all protesters as fringe extremists with, quote, unacceptable views. Despite this unrelenting scrutiny and rhetoric, there has still been no evidence that there are violent extremists in Ottawa. In fact, if there were, I don't know how the government could be responsible in allowing us all to be here today and walk the streets of Ottawa. It undermines their whole claim. There is no evidence that there is a plot to violently overthrow the Canadian government, despite constant repetition and saying so. I remember there was a quote from a previous Liberal minister that says, if you tell a lie big enough and loudly enough, people will totally believe it. This government is constantly saying something that they do not have the evidence to back up. And I'd like to see that evidence if they have it. We deserve to see that evidence. This act was not designed and not intended to crack down on peaceful protesters, even if they are protesting illegally. We have other laws for dealing with this. The government is citing a so-called terrorist threat, but protesters in Ottawa, it's very inconvenient, it's terrible for the people of downtown Ottawa, but honking your horns does not meet the threshold of a terrorist organization, and the government knows that. Without further evidence of a violent threat, I cannot in good conscience support the invocation of this Emergency Act. But even if I were to accept that the government has met the threshold for calling the emergency powers, I would still have serious reservations about the powers that the government says they need to deal with this situation. If they believed there was a threat to critical infrastructure and persons, which they say they believe, I could support. If they showed evidence, I could support declaring Parliament Hill and certain sensitive areas to be a no-go zone. I could accept that we need better coordination between the RCMP and local police. But what I cannot accept is the necessity of the government undermining Section 8 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees Canadians' rights from unreasonable search and seizure to have their bank accounts frozen. The Minister of Justice on a panel last night said, if you are part of a so-called pro-Trump organization, you should be worried. I think all Canadians should be worried when a Minister of Justice threatens people because of their political views. That is not the Canada that any of us want to see, and it's unacceptable, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, throughout this debate, which we are going to be having over the next number of days, Canadians will know that their official opposition is alive and well. We are prepared to stand up for Canadians' rights. We are prepared to hold this government accountable. We're going to keep fighting. We're not going to stop standing up for Canadians' rights and freedoms. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
To the Minister of
Justice. Yep. To the Honourable.
That's to the previous Parliament, Madam Speaker.
Sorry.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade. And I listened to the member's speech as I was actually walking over here on CPAC, and I'll respectfully, and I do want to try and reduce the tone of this debate, point out a couple of things. One is that what happened in Coutts, Alberta is extremely concerning for any Canadian, and I presume all parliamentarians that are concerned about violence. Secondly, that people, including outside of this very building, have openly called for the overthrow of a duly elected government, including an entity calling itself Canadian Unity. I think that is direct evidence of an ideological imperative or agenda that is being pursued. But the last point that I would gently point out to the member opposite is that I appreciated his submissions, and I mean that with all sincerity. But all that is being extended here with respect to laws that are already compliant with Section 8 of the Charter that relate to unreasonable search and seizure and FinTrack is ensuring that FinTrack can be applied to cryptocurrency and to crowdfunding sources. Is that not a necessary initiative given the foreign funding that is streaming into this country right now? The member.
For Sturgeon River Park. Parkland.
I want to thank the honourable member for that very good question, because I was at Public Safety Committee when Deputy Director of Intelligence Barry McKillop answered a question from one of his colleagues who said, why aren't we covering these crowdfunding sources? That's obviously a big loophole. And the Deputy Director stated that the payment processors that move the money from individuals to the crowdsourcing pages report to FINTRAC. And the Canadian banks that receive the money from the crowdsourcing efforts report to the Canadian government. He stated there are no such thing as anonymous donations because everyone must provide their name and their credit card. There are no anonymous donations. FINTRAC knows exactly who's donating, exactly where the money's going. They have the tools that they need. We do not need this further infringement on Canadians' rights and freedoms.
The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was listening carefully to the Conservative colleague's speech. Clearly, the Bloc and the Conservatives intend to oppose this. That is the application of the Emergencies Act, but for visibly and clearly very different reasons. The Bloc is opposed because it is the unanimous will of the National Assembly of Quebec and the government in power in Quebec to not allow the federal government to interfere in its business and impose the Emergencies Act, which is a bit of a bitter pill for Quebecers who remember back to 1970. The colleague instead was talking about the absence of proof that there were in the demonstrations and the occupation that we currently see here in Ottawa, the absence of evidence that there are more radical elements that could threaten security and individuals and national security itself eventually. Can the colleague confirm that he doesn't see these in these illegal demonstrations elements that could be dangerous for public safety? Does he trust what he sees on social networks and what we see in other areas happening in terms of demonstrations? I'd like to have his comments on that. Thank you.
For Sturgeon River Parkland.
I want to thank the honourable member for that question. And you could go on Twitter right now and find some of the most outrageous, offensive, and criminal statements across Canada. But what we do not in this country is base the passage of laws and the invocation of emergency acts based upon the possibility of a threat. We must base it on a real threat. We must base it on evidence that there is a threat to Canadians. And the fact that we are allowed to walk freely through this parliamentary precinct with protesters less than 100 meters from us right now belies the fact that it undermines the claim that there is a serious threat to Canadian democracy. Thank you.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable colleague across the way, I find it very difficult. He was talking about that people were just honking their horns, and that he seemed to try and allude that this convoy was just a simple annoyance for the people in Ottawa. However, I've spoken to quite a few who are working in the downtown. I had a lovely young woman who served me lunch at a restaurant, and I asked her how she was doing. And she talked about the harassment. She talked about specific assaults. She talked about the assaults to friends of hers that were working in the market. That is what we need to address here. So I wonder if he could explain, Madam Speaker, why he seems to think that this is just a simple annoyance and why he would want to take away from the safeties of the people who are working and living in this downtown.
River Parkland.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member is putting words in my mouth. I'm not saying that this is a simple inconvenience for the people of downtown Ottawa. I'm not downplaying the experiences that she's telling. I believe they are true experiences. They're unacceptable experiences, and they are experiences that can be dealt with through existing laws. Harassment is a crime. Intimidation is a crime. It's up to police to enforce these measures. We do not need emergency powers to enforce existing laws. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Regina Capel.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for agreeing to share his time with me. I think it's very important for Canadians to understand that this is in no way, that the government's reaction, the government's proposal to invoke the Emergency Measures Act is in no way connected to public safety, to restoring order, or to upholding the rule of law. We know this because we know what they've done with previous protests and blockades. When the Prime Minister agrees with the aims of protesters, he does nothing. In fact, actually, it would be unfair to say he does nothing. He does nothing to end the blockades. He actually will send negotiators. He'll actually send government delegations to meet with protesters and even propose settlements and compromises when he agrees with the political aims of those protesting. We know this because in 2020, anti-energy protesters, anti-oil and gas worker protesters, held up vital transportation links for weeks, Madam Speaker. At the time, the Prime Minister had a much different tone. Let's take a look at what he said when vital transportation links, when rail lines were blockaded, crippling the Canadian economy for weeks and weeks at a time. He said, and I quote, "Therefore, we are creating a space for peaceful, honest dialogue with willing partners." Compare that to the rhetoric and inflammatory language that he has used over the past several weeks here in 2022. Make no mistake, Madam Speaker, the protests that are happening in Ottawa and that have taken place across the country are a direct result of the Prime Minister's actions and his rhetoric. The demonization of people who are fighting to get their rights back. After 2 years of incredible hardship, 2 years of politicians and government agencies telling people that they weren't allowed to have family members visit them inside their own home. After 2 years of governments telling business owners that they had to keep their doors shut and their employees laid off. After years of people not able to use the very support systems that they've had in their life, relying on friends and family. Gyms closed, activities for children canceled. After 2 years of this, just as there is hope on the horizon, as other jurisdictions around the world and even here in Canada were lifting restrictions and easing mandates, the Prime Minister added a new one. He added a new restriction after 2 years of telling truck drivers that they were essential services, that they were be allowed to travel across the border to bring vital goods into our markets. After 2 years of deeming them that essential service, just as there was hope and reasons to lift restrictions and mandates, the Prime Minister added a new one without any data to back it up, without any evidence to back it up. Then when people started objecting to this, finally saying enough is enough, we want our freedoms back, Madam Speaker. It's time for the government to retreat back to the normal boundaries of government interference in our lives. When people started doing that, started to gather together to peacefully protest against government overreach, what did the Prime Minister do? He called them names, tried to smear them with broad brushes. He called them racists and misogynists. He asked the question, the rhetorical question, Madam Speaker, about whether or not we should tolerate these people. Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister a question. What does not tolerating these people look like? Because what he's done over the past few weeks has just been shameful. This Prime Minister has lowered the office in which he serves to unprecedented depths. In my 17 years of being a member of Parliament, I've never seen a Prime Minister, for that matter, any other politician, so debase the office that they hold, hurling insults at people, referring to a Jewish member of this House as standing with people waving swastikas. Just outrageous, Madam Speaker. And I have to tell my honourable colleagues in the Liberal benches who have often admonished their political opponents for in any way, even sharing the same postal code as someone who may be holding an offensive flag or a placard with unacceptable language on it. And when Conservatives denounce that, that's not good enough for members of the Liberal Party. They say, you're supposed to paint the entire group protesting with that broad brush. But, Madam Speaker, they don't hold themselves to that same standard. I see many honourable members across the way, some of whom I've served with. I know them to be honourable people. I don't assume that they are all racists just because their leader has performed racist acts by putting on blackface so often in his life that he can't remember how many times he's done it. We don't paint every single Liberal member of Parliament with that brush. They have no problem being photographed with the Prime Minister, despite his history of racist acts. So neither should members of Parliament hold or paint the entire group of people who are protesting for their freedoms back with that same broad brush. The lengths at which this government, and indeed not just the government, but many of their friends in the corporate media, to paint every single person who's protesting, who's demanding an end to the restrictions, an end to mandates with that broad brush, Madam Speaker. You look at the lengths that they go to discredit and to dehumanize those people who are just fighting for their traditional civil liberties. And I ask you, Madam Speaker, if we kind of look at this in two different groups. On the one hand, you've got people who are saying after 2 years of hardship, 2 years of sacrifice, 2 years of being forced to comply with unprecedented government intrusion in our lives. Unprecedented. Government's telling you where you can go, who you can have in your house. That is a new level of government interference in our life that we have not seen in recent Canadian history. After 2 years of that, there's a group of people who are saying, I just don't believe I should be fired for making a healthcare decision. Then on the other hand, you've got a group of people who are saying that anybody who holds that view is a racist, a misogynist, an insurrectionist, Madam Speaker. You've got a group of people who are saying that government should have the ability to tell you who you can have in your house, whether or not your business is allowed to stay open. Which group seems more unreasonable, Madam Speaker? I would say after 2 years, those who are fighting against this government intrusion in their lives have a legitimate case to be made. Whether or not we agree with them or not, we must respect their right to advocate for their views. The Prime Minister has not provided any legitimate justification for bringing in the Emergency Measures Act. He asks us to trust him. He says, don't worry, we're going to make sure everything's fine with the courts, we're going to make sure everything's compliant with the Charter. This is the same guy who fired his Attorney General because she wouldn't go along with his plans to interfere in a criminal court case, Madam Speaker. So you will pardon the members of the Conservative Party if we're not going to take the Prime Minister's word that he's not going to abuse the power that he's granting himself. He points to specific incidences that Conservatives also denounced. We denounced the rail blockades in 2020, and we denounced the border blockades in 2022. Because, Madam Speaker, we do not believe that the right to peacefully protest should mean that you get to infringe on the freedom and rights of other people. But when we raised that point in 2020, calling on the government to do something about the rail blockades when it was the anti-energy workers, who, by the way, there are a lot of radical left-wing protests across the country where you see all kinds of placards, anti-Semitic placards. You see banners advocating violence committed against police officers. You don't see the government rushing to crack down on that. They're talking about foreign funding, Madam Speaker. How about the foreign funding that's poured into Canada by the hundreds of millions to help groups fight against energy projects and natural resource projects across the country? Didn't seem to bother the government then, Madam Speaker. But now all of a sudden they say that they've got to do something about it. It's a little bit like that scene in Casablanca when the inspector comes to Rick and says, sorry, I have to close the place down. There's illegal gambling going on. And then the croupier comes over and puts his winnings in his pocket. That's what this government is doing. For years, they've relied on foreign funding coming to help their allies in the political spectrum fight for their goals and fight against Canadians and their interests. So, Madam Speaker, I'm just going to close on this. This is the exact same playbook that we've seen dictatorial governments across the country. They dehumanize their opponents. They invoke threats of foreign influence. Remember, the Berlin Wall was built to keep others out, ostensibly. Governments always talk about their good intentions when they take away rights and liberties. But I'm asking Canadians not to be fooled by this. And I'm asking members of the Liberal Party who actually believe in civil liberties, who actually do believe in the natural limits of government, to do the right thing.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Sport.
I had to just rush back into the House. I was sitting in the lobby and listening to that speech, and I just couldn't believe how willing the member from Regina Capel was to just justify all these behaviors we're seeing. I saw a video of him crossing the road this morning, giving a thumbs up and shaking hands with people who've been occupying this capital city for the last 3 weeks. And my direct question to the member is, if this was happening in Regina, if his neighbors were being occupied and harassed downtown and were afraid to leave their homes, would your position be exactly the same as it is here? Would you be giving them a thumbs up every single day?
speak to the chair if you don't, the honourable member for Regina Capel.
This member comes from a caucus whose leader sent a delegation to protesters. He's saying that I shouldn't wave back to people who wave to me. His government actually sent a minister with a mandate to negotiate. Madam Speaker, I'm Canadian. I'll wave at people when they wave to me. I'll say hello to people who say hello to me. When I have constituents who have left their homes to come and fight for their freedoms, I will listen to them. I will be civil. Because if the government had started off this whole thing with that type of attitude, we might not even be having this debate today, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Pagode. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you know, the Conservatives and the Bloc are both going to vote against the motion today, but there's something that I'd like to understand. In 2012, 10 years ago, there was a student crisis in Quebec, and there were partisans of the Conservative Party who said, come on, let's go in with the hard line. And so same thing in 2020, the Bloc tabled a motion to apologize to victims of the War Measures Act, but the Conservatives voted against our motion. So all of a sudden there's this truckers' protest. So why, when it's the Conservatives' grassroots base that is in play, then all of a sudden the hard line doesn't apply? Because, and they even say that climate change doesn't exist.
Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague, first of all, I will start off my remarks by thanking the members of the Bloc Québécois, because we disagree on many things philosophically, but it's nice to know that even if we disagree on policy, that there's still some common ground on the principles about using the sledgehammer that the government's brought in. But the member is invoking a series of events that happened in 2012. The Conservative Party didn't bring in the Emergency Measures Act in 2012. Mm-hmm. It's legitimate. There are going to be protests across the country, across time, where various parties are going to agree with the aims of the protests or disagree. And we can all express our opinion about whether or not those protests should be happening. But the government should not be bringing in this massive sledgehammer to crack down on dissent when there are existing laws. The Prime Minister talked about Coots. That was resolved. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the indulgence. The Prime Minister talked about the Coots border crossing. It was resolved with existing laws, with existing tools that law enforcement have. There's no need for this act.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Grove Highlands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the honourable member for Regina Capel, I found his speech disturbing at many levels. There were more dog whistles to a rabid base of Trump supporters in one short speech than I've heard ever in this place. But I'd like to correct the record and ask the honourable member to consider that when the Government of Canada sent a delegation, it was because the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have Supreme Court of Canada on their side, that they have a continuity of leadership, territorial responsibility that goes back to our Constitution, Supreme Court of Canada. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs required that both British Columbia and the Government of Canada, in the honour of the Crown, sent representatives to discuss the situation with them. They were not protesters, they were chiefs.
For Regina Capel.
Well, Madam Speaker, I believe the honourable member may be the only member of this House who's actually arrested for participating in an illegal protest. So for her to now somehow justify the Emergency Measures Act, would she have appreciated it while she was breaking laws and getting arrested if the government had the power to freeze her bank account, Madam Speaker? Would she have appreciated anybody who made a donation to the Green Party at that time having their bank accounts frozen for supporting her illegal activities, Madam Speaker? I doubt it.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for King's Heads.
Madam Speaker, I'll be sharing my time with my honourable colleague from Outremont this afternoon. Today I rise to deliver what may be the most important speech I've given since having the privilege to serve the people of King's Heads in the House. Today, we as parliamentarians are debating whether the government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act on Monday was justified. I submit to my colleagues in this House, and indeed all Canadians watching, that the threshold required to trigger the Emergency Act has been objectively met and perhaps exceeded. As the Prime Minister has said in this House, a decision of this nature is not taken lightly. However, the situation we have seen across the country is serious and warrants a response that is proportionate to the impact we have seen on all Canadians. Let me be very clear. I am in full support of legal protests in this country. It is a constitutionally protected right, and indeed I have spoken to some of my own constituents who in their own way have demonstrated their displeasure with the government's protocols to date. However, we have to delineate between lawful protest and individuals who refuse to abide by the rule of law, who have occupied Ottawa and who have blockaded our key border crossings. I believe it's incumbent on all of us to look at the facts and to try to be objective. We have seen a group of individuals in Ottawa who have occupied the city for now 3 weeks. This despite orders from law authorities to disperse and to go home. The key organizers of the Ottawa occupation have openly espoused their goal of overthrowing the government, of meeting with the Governor-General to form a coalition. We've had blockades across the country at key border crossings, which have targeted the country's trade relationship, including at Windsor, Coutts, and Emerson. At Coutts, the RCMP have found weapons and body armor. How can one conclude that this was simply a peaceful protest? The Minister of Public Safety outlined to this House this morning what the impact was having across the country economically. Hundreds of millions of dollars a day in economic harm, blocking critical infrastructure, critical trade routes that hurts everyday Canadians. It impacts our food security and our supply chain. There has been a targeted impact of the Ottawa International Airport, and the organizers of the Freedom Convoy have expressed their desire to reestablish blockades and occupations elsewhere, even if they were taken down by police. We also know that these activities are being financed by international sources. I ask members of these House, do we as parliamentarians have a responsibility to take action on internationally financed activities to organizers of activity that is not only illegal, but indeed represents a threat to Canadian security and the rule of law? I, for one, believe we do. I want to be crystal clear. This is being done to target activities that are illegal and threatening the economic health of the country and the rule of law and order. For those whose intent is to raise issues about government policy, I have no issue. For those who continue to be a part of illegal blockades here in Ottawa or elsewhere, you do not have the ability to do so, and these measures are being implemented because of your unwillingness to abide by the law. So what is the public emergency order being invoked under the Emergencies Act? What does it actually mean? The Conservatives would have you believe this government is limiting all freedoms. These measures do not take away freedoms. The Bloc would suggest that this is akin to the War Measures Act and are seeking to drum up memories of the FLQ crisis. This is not the War Measures Act. It is not taking away the rights of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it is not calling in the Army. This is a specific measure to give additional powers to police and provincial authorities to maintain law and order, monitor the financing, including from foreign sources, that is being used to block and undermine critical infrastructure, and to ultimately remove the blockades and occupations that exist across the country. Let's examine the actual measures in the order. The regulation and prohibition of public assemblies that lead to a breach of the peace and go beyond lawful protest. I want to be clear, lawful protests can continue. Designated and securing places where blockades are to be prohibited. Directing persons to render essential services to relieve impacts of blockades on Canada's economy. So this could include things like tow trucks, Madam Speaker, that could be requisitioned, of course, for compensation by government authorities to help removing trucks and vehicles that are blockading key infrastructure. Authorizing or directing financial institutions to render essential services that relieve the impact of blockades, including regulating and prohibiting the use of property to fund and support the blockades that are undermining economic security in the country. Measures enabling the RCMP to enforce municipal bylaw and provincial offences where required, and the imposition of fines under Section 19 of the Emergencies Act. I submit to this House that these measures are specific, they are time-limited, and geographically focused. The measures will be overseen by a joint parliamentary committee and, of course, must be supported by a majority in this House to remain in force. I have previously mentioned that policing is in the domain of municipalities and the provincial government. Madam Speaker, since day one, our government was and continues to work directly with municipal and provincial authorities and their law enforcement. We've answered calls for additional resources. We helped create integrated operations and additional RCMP officers to try and deal with blockades. Leading into Monday's decision, it was clear that the provincial and municipal authorities were being unable to address the situation. Ironically, members of this House were calling us to show federal leadership. Some Conservatives, after openly encouraging illegal activity to continue, and were asking the government to stop the blockades. Well, these measures are designed to do exactly that. My question to members in this House who are criticizing the government for making available time-limited tools under the Emergencies Act to support law enforcement, what intermediate step would you suggest the government should have undertaken? Beyond asking the Prime Minister to meet with individuals who fly flags that say F-U-C-K, Trudeau, and want to overthrow a democratically elected government and have stated that they will not leave until their demands are met, what security measures would you have suggested this government should have undertaken? That is the key question. As my constituents, Madam Speaker, have rightfully pointed out, it is easy to be an armchair critic, but I have yet to hear much constructive measures on the other side of the House on how to deal with the current situation. Madam Speaker, I support the government's measures. They are reasonable, they are balanced, and they are proportionate to the circumstances we have seen. They are focused on giving tools to police in jurisdictions across the country to resolve illegal blockades that are hurting everyday Canadians. And I think it's extremely important for all of us to remember that these are tools that are available. This order is in effect for 30 days. This is to make sure that we have the ability to address the circumstances that we've seen. I would hope that all members of this House believe that this is an important measure so that we can make sure that the blockades, the economic harm, and frankly, the lack of rule and order that we've seen in certain elements of this country do not continue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I look forward to taking questions from my honourable colleagues.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech today. Earlier we heard from one of his colleagues that the government says they know what a lawful protest looks like. I'm wondering why the government then did not act when we had protesters blockading Via Rail, CN Rail, blocking the Port of Vancouver, crippling our economy and crippling pipelines and oil and gas transfer to the point that Alberta companies are offering to truck propane to Quebec. Why is that considered a lawful protest not to be subject to such extreme draconian acts that the government is bringing in now compared to what's going on right now?
Good question. Member for Kings Heads.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I anticipated the question because I've noticed on this side of the House, on the opposite side, that the members are trying to create that narrative. In fact, I find they've been inconsistent in their own way in the fact that they were very quick to call on government action back in 2020 and were silent for nearly 2 weeks on what we've seen in Ottawa and elsewhere in the country. The difference for me, Madam Speaker, of why this rises to the level of the Emergency Act is the fact that there has been an open, stated goal of those that have been involved in the protest to actually overthrow government and to cause disruption and harm to Canadians. I will go on record and say it is absolutely unacceptable, regardless of the motions or the notion and desire of protesters to block critical infrastructure. I support measures that do that, including in this way here today.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I'd like to say that I am in complete disagreement with the Emergencies Act and its application. That is the object of debate today. unlike the colleague who just spoke, and unlike the Prime Minister from whom we heard this morning, who called this bill reasonable and proportionate, I find it completely disproportionate and unreasonable. I would like to put the following question to my colleague. When you say which intermediate measures would have been put in place, I would like to ask him why, from the outset, didn't you put in place political and public safety measures instead of letting this blockade dig in front of Parliament Hill?
Madam Speaker, in the absence of federal government leadership, ordinary people, brave as they may be, put themselves in harm's way because of this government. Protecting the people is the cornerstone of the contract between citizens and the government. Does the government understand the consequences of its lack of leadership? That was from the critic from the Bloc Québécois 4 days ago. What do they expect federal government leadership to look like? Do they suggest that it looks like what the Conservatives are calling for, that the government just simply does as those outside Wellington are asking for and just eliminate any public health measure related to COVID? What we are doing is very simple. We are giving tools to local law authorities, including in Quebec, to use at their discretion to avoid what we've seen across the country. Would the member opposite think that it is a good idea to have those tools available such that if there was a blockade at Lacal, that is not something that we can do to be able to address that situation? And it's ironic because they say, why didn't this happen at the time? The reality is it has to work its way to a federal level, which it has over the past 3 weeks. Had we intervened at the first time, they would have been the same party to say that it was an overstep and to respect provincial jurisdiction. It is hypocrisy.
Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Speaker, having been in Ottawa for most of this blockade, what I've seen is a complete lack of willingness of the police to do their job. Yes. This should never have spiraled. This was allowed to metastasize and create a crisis at our borders, cutting off hundreds of millions of dollars of trade. I remember when the Conservatives were saying that if 10 unvaccinated truckers didn't get to cross the border, we'd have all our supply lines and our stores shut down. When that didn't happen, their supporters actually shut the border. But I'd like to ask the honourable member, now that we're at this point, it does speak to the absolute failure of this government to have shown leadership throughout. We should never be in a situation where we're using the Emergency Act against people who are setting up hot tubs on Wellington Street because of the lack of rule of law.
For King's Hanson, 15 seconds or less.
I'll try to be very quick. The member talks about leadership. What type of leadership would he like to see? Would he like to see a federal government overreach in the first few days of imposing federal powers? Would the member suggest that leadership looks like acquiescing to what the Conservatives have said? No, what we've done is we've waited until the situation warranted a federal response. Here we are. We're putting tools in place to be able to address the situation. It's a bit of a nothing question in my mind. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism, Assistant Minister of Finance.
Here. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The debate we are having today is crucial, and I'm speaking to all members of this House, of course, but also to Canadians across the country. This week, the Government of Canada declared a state of emergency, and this decision was not taken lightly. And for good reason. Invoking the Emergencies Act is not the first thing the Government of Canada should do, or even the second, Madam Speaker. It is a last resort, but we must admit that this avenue is now necessary. The illegal blockades that have taken place across the country over the past 3 weeks have disrupted the lives of far too many Canadians. These blockades have caused significant damage to our economy and our democratic institutions. Jobs and Canada's prosperity are at stake. Because of the illegal actions that have been taken, international confidence in Canada as an investment location is now shaken, Madam Speaker. And we cannot stand by while the livelihoods of Canadian workers are threatened, while businesses, large and small, are affected by these blockades.
We will not let Canada's reputation on the international stage be tarnished. That's why we are taking action. The Emergency Economic Measures Order will allow the government to take concrete steps, concrete action to stop the financing of the illegal blockades. The main objective of these measures is to limit the flow of money that is used to finance this unlawful activity and to prevent additional financial support. As the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance has said before, this is about following the money. Two broad categories of financial measures are being enacted. First, those aimed at crowdfunding platforms and payment service providers, and second, those applicable to Canadian financial service providers. Let's look at the first one. Crowdfunding platforms and some payment service providers are not currently subject to the anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing laws that we have in this country. It therefore stands to reason that they could be used to finance unlawful activities such as the blockades that we are seeing. To address this, the order extends the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing rules to cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment processors that they use. Specifically, the entities that are in possession of any funds associated with the illegal blockades are now required to register with FINTRAC, the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, and to report suspicious and large value transactions of persons involved in the blockades. This will mitigate the risks that these platforms could be used to receive funds from illicit sources or to finance illicit activity. Second, with respect to our financial service providers, the order directs them to intervene when they suspect that an account belongs to someone participating in the illegal blockades. This means that banks, insurance companies, and other financial service providers must now temporarily cease providing financial services, including freezing their accounts when they believe an account holder or client is engaged in illegal blockades. The order applies to all funds held in a deposit, in a checking, or in a savings account, and to any other type of property. This also includes digital assets such as cryptocurrencies. As a result, Canadian financial service providers are now able to immediately freeze or suspend an account of an individual or business affiliated with these illegal blockades, and to do so without a court order, Madam Speaker. Financial service providers are also protected against civil liability for the actions that they take to comply with the order. Of course, these service providers are required to unfreeze accounts when the account holder stops assisting or participating in the illegal blockades.
With the Emergency Economic Measures Order, the government is also ordering Canadian financial institutions to review their relationships with anyone involved in illegal blockades. The order also gives federal, provincial, and territory government institutions a new power to share relevant information with banks and other financial service providers if that information will help stop financing of illegal blockades and illicit activities in Canada. Madam Speaker, the vast majority of Canadians, those who are law-abiding and are not involved in these illegal blockades, will see no difference. This order in Council will not change anything for them. These measures are designed to stop the funding that enables illegal blockades. They are targeted and temporary measures. They will apply for 30 days and are aimed at individuals and companies that are directly or indirectly involved in illegal activities that harm our economy. These are necessary measures, Madam Speaker. True, blockades are only occurring in certain parts of our country, we know that, but they are hurting the entire Canadian economy. it's also true that most parts of the country have not been the scene of these illicit activities. But the funding that enabled these illicit actions did not only come from neighborhoods where trailers were parked. It came from across the country. Moreover, some individuals have crossed inter-provincial borders to participate in these activities. Activities, Madam Speaker, that I'd like to stress are illegal. Our democratic institutions are under threat. The Canadian economy is under threat. Peace, order, and good government are under threat in Canada. This is unacceptable. We must end it, and we will end it.
The message is clear. From the finance perspective, if people are funding blockades that harm the Canadian economy, their bank account will be frozen. If people that fund blockades think that they can get around the law by using cryptocurrencies, that won't work. If a company's truck is used in illegal activity, the vehicle's insurance will be suspended and the company's bank accounts will be frozen. Semi-trailers, they should be on our roads, Madam Speaker, not parked for weeks on end in front of Parliament. They should be delivering the goods and the services that will grow our economy, not holding up traffic at border crossings or paralyzing our city centres. Cela dit,
nevertheless, I remain optimistic. I remain optimistic that the law will soon be restored and that the blockades will be dismantled. I remain optimistic that we will end this pandemic while still being there for each other. And I remain optimistic that we can strengthen our economy, not by honking horns, but by the hard work of our entrepreneurs, of our small and large companies, and by thoughtful and responsible economic policies. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Before we go to questions and comments, I believe the Honourable Member for Regina Capel has a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to clarify the record. I misspoke during my questions and comments in response to the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I indicated that she was the only member of this House to have been arrested for protesting illegally. I, of course, completely forgot the image of the Minister of the Environment in his orange jumpsuit. He, too, was arrested for illegal protest. And I don't...
Noted. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
To the Honourable Member for Regina Capel, I would like to retain the honour of being the only Member of Parliament currently serving as a Member of Parliament when I faced arrest non-violently, surrendering immediately, and accepting the consequences, unlike our friends outside.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville. She's been waiting for a long time.
Thank you, Madam. The individual who just spoke indicated that one of the problems here is that Canada's reputation is being tarnished by this. And I would ask her, whose reputation is truly being tarnished? Canadians' reputations or this government's reputation? The stands of everyday Canadians that have been taken have gained international support and have drawn disdain directly towards the Liberal government and especially the language and actions of this Prime Minister.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'm sure it will come as no surprise, Madam Speaker, that I entirely disagree. I think that there are many people that have fallen to, how can I say, Canadians have lost confidence in many different institutions as a result of what has been happening over the course of the last 3 weeks. Top of mind is the police. I believe that many Canadians right across the country question whether law enforcement was there, and this Emergency Measures Act provides more tools to our police force in order to maintain confidence in law and order in this country.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Madam Speaker, my colleague did mention that her government will not allow Canada's reputation to be tarnished by the events. Right now, the flag has become a symbol of the extreme right and of disorder. I would like to know, given that her speech seems to have written 3 weeks ago, does she agree with, does she need some help with her agenda? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Canada's flag is the flag of all Canadians and of all Quebecers, and I wear it proudly every day. I'd like to answer my colleague because I didn't really understand his very strange question, but I'd like to also stress that I see that Quebecers agree with the application of the Emergencies Act. In fact, more than 70% of Quebecers approve the invocation of this act, Madam Speaker, and I am proud to represent them. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I first would like to say that I hold this government responsible for letting these extreme right convoy members into their downtown area, but I'd like to understand there is a collective memory of Quebecers when the War Measures Act was invoked. Today, we cannot compare what was happening at the time to what's happening today. Fundamental rights are being protected, and there is a time limitation. Does this reassure my colleague? Because all parliamentarians will have powers to guarantee limits. Madam Speaker, I find myself agreeing entirely with my colleague from Rosemont. We're talking here about a totally different act. The Emergencies Act is not at all the same as the War Measures Act that was used in 1970. We're not sending soldiers to the ground, and I agree that there is transparency and powers for all parliamentarians to end the application of this act. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I noticed today some very interesting public opinion polling coming out of Quebec. As a matter of fact, it says that 72% of Quebecers support the use of the Emergency Measures Act. More importantly, Abacus data that's been released recently say that 63% of Bloc supporters in the last election would never vote for an MP that supports the occupation going on outside. Yet the Bloc seems to be showing their support for the occupation. I'm wondering if the Parliamentary Secretary, can provide some insight into that.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I think I will address this question in French with the permission of my colleague.
And I agree, as I said earlier, that the vast majority of Quebecers are in favor of applying this act. And I would also say that the approval rating is even higher in Quebec than the rest of the country. So, yes, I do think that we have to be very cautious when we're talking on behalf of Quebecers, like the other side of the House is saying, as members of the Bloc.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I will be splitting my time for remarks with the Honourable Member from South Surrey, White Rock. Madam Speaker, it's an honor to rise on behalf of the citizens of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, not only in this House generally, but in such important times. And sometimes we do forget what a tremendous honor it is. I'm sad, though, to be here discussing emergency measures here today. This has been a time, with respect, where the Prime Minister has inflamed, has incited, and has divided. The Prime Minister took that same inflammatory approach yesterday when he spoke in response to a question from the member from Thornhill. I was dismayed that he would not apologize or did not apologize for that today. Instead, he came into this House this morning and doubled down on years of division. So let's recap. The predecessor legislation was invoked 3 times: World War I, World War II, and the FLQ crisis. The Prime Minister invites and likes for Canadians to think that he's the common person. So I'm not sure if he has walked through downtown Ottawa of late, but I did yesterday and today, and I saw trucks in streets. There were a few streets that were plugged, and those trucks need to go, period. The question then becomes, how should that be done?
Now, I took an oath when I was sworn in, and it was the greatest days of my life, to take that oath on behalf of all Canadians, and particularly on behalf of the residents of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. And I took my oath to do my job to the best of my ability. I have to be satisfied as a legislator that the preconditions for this act have been met. That is my job. That is the oath I took, and that is something that I take very seriously. So I read the act, and I considered it. I actually had to read it twice. I've practiced law for 14 years, Madam Speaker. I previously taught at a law school for a number of years. So when it came to my analysis of the act, I did what I taught my students to do. I went back to first legal principles, first statutory principles, and we apply legal principles and statutory principles, not because it is popular, not because we want the trucks to be cleared in any way possible, but because we here, 338 of us, must apply the law. After all, the Prime Minister has made the same remarks about the rule of law. He wouldn't strip Canadians of citizenship just because it was popular, just because people may like it. But instead, we must accede to the rule of law. So let's apply the rule of law, Madam Speaker. Let's apply the legislation here. This legislation is clear. It says that its application must be the last resort. Members of this House have repeatedly asked, what was step one? Crickets. What was step two? Crickets. The police weren't even stopping people carrying jerry cans in. What was step three? More crickets. Word salad. The official leader of the opposition asked the Prime Minister to attend a meeting with all party leaders with a view to bringing this matter to an end, and by my count, that was about 10 days ago. Crickets. Even without the Emergencies Act application, which is alive right now, Madam Speaker, protesters could be arrested under the current regime. There are laws about causing a disturbance, mischief, and participation in these sorts of illegal activities. The Criminal Code is very clear on that, and I'm not even touching on the Ontario Highways Traffic Act. The trucks could be seized incidental to arrest as evidence. They could be seized with a warrant. All things that the police have at their disposal right here, right now, to address the very situation that the Emergencies Act says it will deal with as a last resort. These first resorts have not been addressed. So let's next look, Madam Speaker, at what was resolved without the use of the Emergencies Act. Coots, the Ambassador Bridge, Windsor. Why? Because the police had the powers to do so and used those powers. My point, Madam Speaker, is this. The legislation says that we do not resort to its use unless it is absolutely necessary. And what we have seen in these three instances I just mentioned is that it is not absolutely necessary. And as a legislator, I need to be convinced that the threshold has been met, or I will not vote for such legislation. I wish we could simply invoke legislation to make our problems go away. That's just not the case, Madam Speaker. It can't be done as a measure of convenience. Let's not forget, this wasn't done during 9/11. This wasn't done during COVID. This wasn't done during railway blockades that had a crippling impact on our economy and economic consequences. This wasn't done throughout many protests throughout the country. This wasn't done when BC highways and rail were washed out due to recent flooding. I recently received an inquiry from a constituent in the North Thompson area near Blue River in my riding. There have been protests in that area for years, and Blue River is a small community. Violence, threats, blockades. And I told that constituent what I am telling this House. The legislation is a last resort to be used in extraordinary circumstances of national emergency when nothing else will do. As one of the members for Ottawa here said earlier today, this has been going on for 4 weeks, and I echo that sentiment. I understand that it's been going on for 4 weeks, and those committing illegal activity need to stop. It has been going on for much longer in my riding, and those people are asking the same questions. Now, in closing, Madam Speaker, I will say this. I do agree with the Prime Minister on one point, and he did say that he is trying to save jobs. Unfortunately, I would eliminate the plural. He's trying to save one job, his own, and that is not right. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I welcome the member to the House as a new member, but also as a fellow member of the bar. I'll politely point out that an emergency was not...
Could I ask that the people who are outside of the chamber please stop speaking so loudly? We can barely hear ourselves here. Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
So I welcome the new member, also welcome him as a fellow member of the bar. He indicated he's read the statute. He knows full well that in terms of COVID, enacting a public welfare emergency requires the provinces to initiate such a request. No request is forthcoming. Secondly, he asked for what steps have been taken. The first step was actually the City of Ottawa declaring an emergency, which didn't render the results. The second step was the province of Ontario declaring an emergency, which hasn't rendered results. The last step, the final step, is this very important debate that we're having today. And I'm going to put to him an issue about the capability of the province under its authorities to deal with it, which I think is squarely an issue, because the provincial order that has been made by Premier Ford fails in two important respects. It does not compel essential workers like tow trucks to actually tow vehicles away. And secondly, it cannot compel vehicle licenses to be suspended where that vehicle originates in another province, such as one of the Western provinces. Are those not instances of a lack of provincial authority which necessitates the usage of the Emergencies Act in this case?
Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Well, the criminal code actually deals with all of those issues. And when the honourable member speaks about the invocation of a state of emergency, I didn't see a single thing change. He's right. I didn't see a single thing change. I didn't see any enforcement change. What was step one? What was step two? We can't simply do this because we don't like how something is being enforced. It should be a matter of last resort. And those steps are available in the criminal code, whether it comes to seizure, to search, or to seizure and arrest with warrant. So with respect, I disagree.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for, just a moment, Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for the speech. A number of things I agree with. We heard from the Prime Minister say this morning that there were a number of solutions and that the Emergencies Act was the last resort. We don't know the first measure, the second, the third taken. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague the following question. A government that is unable to ensure security when it comes to truckers' demonstrations, does that government deserve to be sitting on the UN Security Council?
Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
I would thank the Honourable Minister for his remarks. I look forward to someday hopefully being, pardon me? Oh, sorry, did I say minister? Honourable member, I misspoke. I thank the honourable member for his remarks. The Prime Minister declared Canada is back when he was first elected. The problem is this. You can say anything you want to say, but at the end of the day, it's actions that people will judge. And when people look at actions, they look at integrity. And we have a Prime Minister that, with respect, has not displayed a great deal of integrity, whether it comes to ethical breaches or it comes to a deliberate desire to divide, both in this House, but also with respect to Canadians. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Hamilton Centre.
Speaker, we're seeing growing escalations. This situation is clearly out of control due to lack of leadership from all levels of government. In addition to the firearms and arrests for conspiracy to commit murder in Coutts, an attempted arson of a residential building in the occupation area, convoy members have been deputizing themselves and now claim they have the lawful authority to detain and arrest others. Madam Speaker, I don't recall the honourable member mentioning the seriousness of the violent terror cell apprehended at Coutts on conspiracy to commit murder. No one wants to see someone get hurt here, yet this is a recipe for disaster. Does the honourable member and the Conservatives not view this situation as an emergency?
For Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
I'm very clear here. When we talk about the legislation, has the threshold been met? Simply saying, do you review it this way colloquially, isn't the question that is before this House. The question, Madam Speaker, that's before this House is, has the threshold been met? And with respect, I don't believe it has been, because I don't view this as the act of last resort. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is a somber time in this House to be speaking. It is a seminal time in Canadian history, in my view. It is apparent to me that we seem to be living in two Canadas. There is the Canada of fear and division promoted by the current Prime Minister and the leader of the NDP, confirmed by their caucuses. But there's another Canada out there, a united and proud nation that has sacrificed and done without and suffered economically, physically, and in their mental health condition. This is a Canada that is a bit worn out, plainly speaking, but still firmly patriotic and ready to take on whatever the future brings. They are Canadians who do not share this PM's post-national narrative and embrace the essence of Canada that they see themselves as a part of, as the true north, strong and free. In our national anthem, we call out to God and we pray that he keep our land glorious and free. The truth is that Canada can only be glorious if it is free, meaning its people are free, free from tyranny, free from government abusing its awesome powers, mindful of the responsibility and trust given to it in a representative democracy. Because this Prime Minister wants to dwell in the extreme, infringe and false narratives of what is happening during peaceful protests, I am choosing to address those other Canadians. I remember the historical term, the two solitudes, Mr. Speaker, in reference to impasses between Anglophone and Francophone people in Canada. Its meaning was meant to refer to a perceived lack of communication and, moreover, a lack of will to communicate. Here today we see history repeating itself, Madam Speaker. A lack of communication, but more significantly, a lack of will to communicate between the present federal government and Anglophone and Francophone citizens alike. The Emergency Act is extraordinary legislation. Extraordinary means remarkable, exceptional, unusual, and uncommon. The measures in this Act are to be entered into reservedly, advisedly, and with extreme caution. Through all the trials and tribulations of a newly created and burgeoning nation, trying to unite coast to coast to coast, through other public health emergencies, through other civil unrest, our federal government saw fit to invoke the Emergency Act and its precursor, the War Measures Act, only 4 times in our history. These extraordinary measures were used in World War I, World War II, Prime Minister Trudeau I, and Prime Minister Trudeau II. Excuse me. World War I, World War II, a previous Prime Minister in the 1970s, and the current Prime Minister. It was not invoked, Madam Speaker, during the fears and protests around the Spanish flu. It was not invoked during the workers' strikes in the 1930s, not invoked during the crises in Oka or Ipperwash or Caledonia, during the aftermath of 9/11, during crippling national strikes affecting our supply chains, during the rail blockades or pipeline protests, also negatively affecting the Canadian economy. The list is long, Madam Speaker. The point is, where other methods and authorities exist to deal with serious disagreement, government should use those methods and authorities. Government should not subjugate free people to abusive, wide-ranging, freedom-altering overreach of government. A Liberal member asking a question earlier in this debate said to the Leader of the Opposition, well, what if this happened in your neighbourhood, in your riding? Well, it did happen in my neighbourhood, Madam Speaker, and in my riding. It happened at one of the border crossings in South Surrey White Rock. I received many reports on the ground about the activities there. I did have 3 complaints through national media calling the people involved the same outrageous, inflammatory names that the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister have been using. There were no complaints to my office. On the other side, I have had overwhelming outpourings of support from my constituents because the supporting protests were meaningful to those in attendance, and even joyful in hope for change. What kind of change? Not necessarily a change in government, although that might happen in the next federal election, but most definitely a change in federal government approach. On 2 previous weekends, vehicle after vehicle, in support of the right to protest, this government's policies, actions, and inactions drove in a rolling loop around those border crossings and highways in South Surrey, with thousands, not hundreds, thousands of Canadians cheering them on from the sides of the roads and on highway overpasses. Those involved were vocal but peaceful, holding high Canadian flags, singing the national anthem, saying prayers, and greeting others cheerfully, including the police. The result, Madam Speaker, is that the border has been cleared. Goods are flowing, and the police, using tools already at their disposal, were able to show both respect for the protesters and clear any impasses. Why is the Emergencies Act needed now in my riding? It isn't. The only distress being expressed right now from my riding is that the Prime Minister and his cabinet are showing disdain, having inflamed the situation, are not even attempting to engage in dialogue, and saw the only tool in their toolbox to be taking more power unto themselves. I have heard from many civil enforcement officers, civil liberties scholars, and lawyers on this subject, Madam Speaker. Collectively, they want me to remind the House that a public order event is not necessarily an emergency. We are down to a protest in a few blocks of downtown Ottawa. That's all. With some proper policing, the situation in Ottawa can be brought to a conclusion, as it has been elsewhere. Unlike some of the other events, in downtown Ottawa, our nation's capital, we're not at a U.S. border, so it does not affect imports and exports. I'm not sure who the Leader of the NDP was referring to when he said, "Don't let your anger turn into hatred." The Prime Minister has turned his back literally on a large segment of Canadian citizens, showing them nothing but derision and disdain. This only escalates, never de-escalates, tension and disagreement. I had occasion, Madam Speaker, early in my career to attend advanced negotiation classes at Harvard Law School under the supervision of Professor Roger Fisher, the author of the acclaimed book titled Getting to Yes. There are necessary steps that should be taken in any conflict resolution. Some form of engagement, de-escalation, respectful dialogue, looking to best alternatives to resolve the conflict, short of the only one the PM has employed, which has been described as the nuclear option. I agree that we should never have been at this moment looking like a failed nation state. We are looking this way due to weak and ineffective leadership. It is that simple. Why invoke this act now when it was not invoked all those times before? The federal government should be talking to and engaging with citizens to resolve this conflict by introducing a plan to get back to normal. Instead, we have seen the federal government demonize and insult our fellow Canadians. Remember, Prime Minister, they are all Canadians out there on Wellington Street, and a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. I'm pretty sure I heard that somewhere before. Instead of creating a plan, engaging in dialogue, and looking for a peaceful solution, the Prime Minister is looking to invoke and stoke more fear and division. Countries around the world and Canadians themselves at home are looking at this and wondering, is this my Canada? Is this the Canada I have believed in patriotically, firmly, and with a full heart for so long? The truth is that the Prime Minister and the government initiated these protests by Canadians by calling them down in the first place and then not dealing with it as it unfolded. I think back to a former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party that went along with the former Prime Ministers who invoked the War Measures Act, and then for the third time in Canadian history, and not during wartime, Madam Speaker. He voted for that War Measures Act. His name was Robert Stansfield. He later said it was the greatest regret of his life that he voted with the government that day. Edmund Burke is often quoted, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." Well, I stand against this measure with every fiber of my being. I will vote no. This is a free country, and its people should be free to protest, free to exercise their given human rights, and we need to respect and engage them. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I respect the member opposite a great deal and served with it on the Justice Committee in the last Parliament. I would just simply put it to her, because I've heard this narrative throughout the debate thus far, that the tools are no longer necessary, for example, vis-a-vis blockades at borders, because the blockades have been cleared. And I would put to her a few simple facts, just simply one lawyer to another, that we know that there was an attempted resurrection of a blockade at Windsor just yesterday, and the Windsor Police used the tools under the Emergencies Act to their benefit to prevent and thwart that quickly. We also know that protesters who have threatened to take up arms have openly declared that they will be returning to Quebec City on February 19th in front of the Assemblée Nationale. And we know the type of arms that were seized at Coutts. Does not these threats and ongoing threats merit the necessity of using a federal power, including the Emergencies Act, to deal with what is an ongoing, current and future situation in this country? Merci.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend opposite. I also have great respect for his intellect and abilities, and yes, I apologize to all Canadians, we are both lawyers. But having said that, we are now members of Parliament, and as well. And with great respect, I do not think it should have ever come to this. I believe the Prime Minister and the government should have engaged in respectful dialogue, should have at least signaled out an understanding that we can have differences of opinion in a free country, and those differences are being listened to. And if the government had acted on our opposition motion to table a plan of action, all of this would have calmed down immeasurably.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I certainly agree this should never have come to this. The fact that a protest was allowed to become an occupation speaks to failures at every single level. But the problem I really have with my honourable colleague and what her party's saying is, if the Prime Minister had just gone out and talked to the nice protesters, everything would have been settled. When Pat King, an organizer for them, the spokesperson, said this is going to be settled with bullets, a line is crossed. And I know the fact that he's talking about shooting the Prime Minister may not seem like a problem, but it should be a problem. It should be a problem to every parliamentarian. I will not negotiate with anyone who talks about shooting a Prime Minister of this country. They need to start addressing these issues.
Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Well, I thank my colleague for the question, and with all due respect, the police and law enforcement authorities in this country deal with threats, deal with violence every single day. They deal with it effectively, they deal with it forcefully, and they deal with it definitively. Our Crown prosecutors make sure that those people come to justice. The expression that's coming to my mind, Madam Speaker, is, "O ye of little faith." Why do you have such little faith in the people who are tasked with keeping us safe? You don't need these extraordinary measures.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires.
The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't think I would do this, but I would like to add on to what the member for Timmins, James Bay, just said. At what point do the Conservatives recognize that there is a real threat that the police visibly don't have the means to contain? At what point will there be an admission that the evidence is there, seized weapons in Coutts, veiled threats and not so veiled threats, literally, on social media? So I would like my colleague to tell me what more evidence is needed that the police cannot contain this occupation here in Ottawa. Thank you.
Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Thank you, my colleague, for the question. It would be really refreshing to actually have real evidence connecting these dots. The Minister for Emergency Preparedness, at a press conference in the last couple of days, asserted that what happened at Coutts, the arrests at Coutts, were directly related to the leadership here in Ottawa. And under questioning by the media, back down further again, and basically said, well, I'm just sort of figuring that out myself. That is not real evidence, that is not a real connection, and that is not a national security threat.
Bravo.